We are. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the June 13th, 2022 Grants Pass City Council Workshop.
Left me hanging.
First up on the agenda today is the Community Development Block Grant discussion.
Okay. What time? Okay.
Good morning, Council. So we're going to talk about the Community Development Block Grant. We're going to talk about minor amendments. So there are requested allocations to the CDBG program for fiscal year 18 to 21. And they're due to underspending of the funding through the first consolidated plan cycle, which runs from 2015 to 2019. And so as a requirement, HUD requires that we have a balance that's no greater than 1.5 times our annual grant that's remaining in the city line of credit 60 days prior to the end of the program year. So there's projects that have been deemed infeasible since their original proposal or delayed in implementation. And there's a potential partnership with Habitat for Humanity and Home Bridging GP. The use of these funds is for site acquisition and improvements of public infrastructure. And it allows for the use of the funds to be used for that public infrastructure so long as improvements are to serve low to moderate income households and other federal regulations, and meets other federal regulations. So the city has received written confirmation from Home Bridging that they agree to comply with all HUD rules and is willing to enter into an agreement with the city to obtain these CDBG funds. So kind of as a point we want to drive home is that none of this federal money is being passed to individuals as part of this Community Development Block Grant program. It's for the funding of infrastructure only. So you should have with you the subrecipient agreement that Home Bridging is going to have to enter into. And so typically with federal funds come federal strings, meaning that they're going to be subject to regulation under the Code of Federal Regulations. And it's important for the city to follow these rules because failure to do so could inhibit the city's ability to receive funding like this in the future. So I want to draw your attention to what the subrecipient agreement requires of Home Bridging GP as a result of receiving these funds. So under Section 1, Paragraph 2, it states the activities that are undertaken with the funding of the agreement. And so the recipient is going to be promising that the activities that they will undertake with the funding will meet the following objectives, which include benefiting low and moderate income persons. And so moving on to Paragraph 5, it's performance monitoring, where the city is going to be monitoring the performance of recipient. So their books are going to be open. It's going to be one of those things where the city is going to be constantly having to meet reporting requirements. So they're going to have access to the information as to how the money is being spent and when.
Can you stop?
Yes.
Will that mean that there's a deed restriction on the homes or that follows the houses? Just out of curiosity, because I do know that is a federal guideline for moderate.
So ostensibly, if that's a federal guideline, then yes, it's going to have to follow that and follow those rules.
Okay.
Okay. So like I said earlier, Home Bridging GP is going to be required to enter into the subrecipient agreement to have access to these funds. Sorry. So under Section 4, Paragraph 4 of the agreement, it's an affirmative action and equal opportunity, which states explicitly that the recipient is required to provide services to all clients meeting eligibility requirements without respect to age, citizenship, status, color, familiar status, gender identity or expression, marital status, mental disability, national origin, physical disability, race, religion, religious observance, sex, sexual orientation, and source or level of income. Now, this is a program that's restricted to low and moderate income families. There was a question last week as to the appropriateness of working with an institution that has a religious bent. And so as part of our investigation into this question, we had contacted HUD, and they had responded to us that generally federal funding to faith-based institutions is allowed, so long as there's no quid pro quo. That is an arrangement where membership in a church, donations, attendance, or observance of any religious institution's religion is required to receive the HUD-based service. So the limitation on that, of course, is that faith-based institutions are not allowed to engage in inherently religious activities, such as worship, religious instruction, or proselytizing as part of the program or services funded by HUD. And most importantly, and this is a point that's driven home by the HUD FAQs regarding work with religious institutions, that any participation in religious activities or affiliation with the church or any religious institution has to be completely voluntary, and that fact has to be made known by the religious institution. And when we're talking about completely voluntary, we're talking about a scenario where, say, a recipient or say a beneficiary of these funds is at a function and grace is being said around the table, a prayer is being said around the table. For them to be there, they would feel compelled to participate in that activity, which is by definition not voluntary. So it's a very strict guideline that everything has to be voluntary. So that kind of brings us to the conclusion that so long as a CDBG program is available to everybody, it's not a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment. And the subrecipient agreement does require, again, that the program be made available to everybody, regardless of any protected class. That eligibility of use is spelled out in the subrecipient agreement and the reporting that is going to be required by the city in order to keep track of these funds. So the call to action is at council's discretion. We're asking that you approve the subrecipient agreement for signature by the city manager, and your alternative is to not approve the agreement. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Augustus. What questions do you have? Joel?
The restriction for 150% of the balance, when is the date on which that's measured? In other words, when do we have to take action before we are in violation of that?
Do you know the answer to that?
Did my question make sense?
Ann Ingalls, City of Grants Pass. No, it did not. So what is the 150 days that you're asking about?
Yeah, you presented, the motivation for the city is we have a balance there and some unspent money.
Yes.
Okay, where was that at? Prior to the end of the program year. What's the end of the program year?
The end of the program year is September 30th of every year.
Okay.
And so we have to have the money spent by the 2nd of August.
So there's a timeline there that we have to have?
There is a timeline. And just to clarify, we had HUD monitored us last September.
Sure.
And then, of course, we had findings that we had to send back. One of the findings that is not closed out yet is the reprogramming and movement of funds for those inactive. And that is what we're trying to do with this and the minor amendments that we have put together.
Sure. Money always comes with strings.
It does, it does.
Okay.
And we just talked with, Brad and I talked with the HUD rep on Wednesday, and the plan that I had put together in April, they were not completely happy with, so they've tasked us with, they've tasked me with presenting another plan. So that's what I'm putting together now. And the minor amendments that the city manager, with your approval, can sign, that will help move the funds into the areas, to the active activities. And I've already, those minor amendments cancel out the older year inactive funds. I believe Councilor De La Grange a year or so ago asked about the weatherization funds and why weren't they moving. This is part of all that, moving those funds into an active program, which we will not only be helping the city with public housing, but it's crucial that we have this passed.
Okay. The other thing, I hear what you're saying. The other thing, I don't, and this is for you, Augusta, so you got religious-based hospitals like Providence, and then you got Asante. You got Catholic hospitals, I can't remember the name of them. They all get federal money. You got Rogue Retreat, they're a church-based institution. Is there, is that how they comply with the HUD requirements? I know the hospital doesn't have HUD requirements, but they do deal with the federal government with another branch and have to deal with the same federal requirements.
So the general rule is that when an institution receives financial assistance from the federal government in the form of federal money, there's a requirement, not an expectation, there's a requirement that applicable rules, statutes, and laws are followed, including the Constitution. So where you run up against is a First Amendment Establishment Clause sort of scenario that we may have had here. But the rules are generally the same, so long as that institution that's receiving those federal funds is not actively promoting religion or actively promoting participation in religion as a requirement for receiving those funds, then it's not an establishment clause issue. So with the example for a hospital, right? So if there's a traffic accident, for example, and the closest hospital is a religious hospital, and that person who's in the traffic accident isn't religious, they're going to be taken to that hospital and they're going to receive the same sort of care that they would get any other place.
Sure.
So that's kind of the distinguishing line there.
Right. Seems like there's a lot of precedent for it, and it seems to work well. Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions? Val?
I hate to be a stickler on this, but I do kind of want to pursue it because I know it says client income and residency requirements, services under this agreement shall be limited to residents of the city of Grants Pass. Services shall be provided to recipients who qualify as low income, very low income, or extremely low income, as those terms are defined in the City of Grants Pass Consolidation Plan and specified by the current year annual income ranges located at. I'm going to assume those are the income levels that we've gotten, everything that we get when they do our middle housing, low income housing, and that they're like 60% or below of the median income. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so my next state is if they're helping them, and like I said, I love it when churches help, but I just want to make sure that there is the expectation as anybody else, a builder in our community, if they are in a program that's a federal program and they are providing funds for that, they also have to monitor it for 30 years. So that's the question that I have, is does that mean that Bridges will need to monitor and make sure if they get people into those homes and they're living in those homes and then they resell those homes, that the next person that buys that home will also, that the agreement goes along with the house, or how does that work? That's my question.
Frankly, I'm not sure as to the answer to that question. I would have to look into it. I'm stepping in for the community development director today for this. So that particular question, I mean, I kind of just have to fall back on the fact that, you know, with those federal funds, there has to be some sort of accountability. So if we're talking about the subrecipient agreement, they're going to be signing this. Home Bridging is going to be signing this, their representative. They're going to be responsible for monitoring on a limited basis, and the city is going to be able to oversee it. But as to the rest of your question, I'm unsure.
I guess that's my concern when I heard you say that if we oversee it and it doesn't happen, that we can lose our CDBG funding. And that's what concerns me, because I know that there are such stringent laws regarding affordable housing and making sure that you're using these funds in that way. It's not that I wouldn't love for all of our builders locally to be able to use, but I know I've been fighting for our local builders to use some of these funds, and every time we get pushed up against a wall that says, well, you have to have a deed restriction in order for that to happen, because these funds have to be monitored over 30 years. So I'm just afraid that if we get into that, that will open us up to losing CDBG funds. And so I just want to make sure that of that. That's my concern.
And I understand that what I can do is reach out again to our HUD rep, but I know that our HUD rep answered my question initially when I had the concern early on this year as to using HUD funds for this project. And she answered it eloquently, and I believe that it was involved in Augustus's PowerPoint as well. I can check into, I know exactly what you're talking about with the 30-year program, because I did look into that as well.
I can go to where this is on page, and I just pulled this up because I also found this eligible participants. It does say presumed low-income person. The following categories of individuals are presumed by HUD to be principally low to moderate income. For services provided to populations that are presumed to be low income, recipient must document the condition present that meets the presumption of low income. Verification of household income is not necessary, but the note says this: the presumption of low medium status may be challenged in a situation there is substantial evidence that the person in the presumed group is to serve is most not likely. So that is what I say is we can go upon this, but my fear is if we do and then we find out afterwards that it isn't, that we might lose funding on other projects. So that's my concern.
Okay, so to maybe address that particular concern, in order for the inventory that home bridging is going to have, they have an application process. They are going to be discussing the applications. Their application is going to have certain information that's going to allow them to make that presumption. So there's going to be a paper trail as far as and to my understanding, there's going to be a paper trail as to how home bridging is keeping track of that information. That information will be open to the city. And so, again, you know, it's a matter, I think, of their record keeping on the front end. And as part of, you know, because we're talking about very limited inventory, and the inventory you're talking about is valuable. The onus is going to be on home bridging initially to keep good records on the front end as to the qualifications that they're using to make these determinations as how the inventory is to be allocated to their applicants. And so does that somewhat alleviate your concern?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I would love it to have it be that way, but if that's the way it's going to be, I also want it to be that way for our builders who go in the beginning and do a low-income housing, but don't have to do a deed restriction for 30 years. And that's how it's set up right now. The way that that's set up, our builders have to go in and do a deed restriction for 30 years, indicating that that stays in low and medium income for a period of time. And that is to prevent them from doing it and then flipping it, you know, 5 years from now, and nobody's paying attention anymore and going off in a different direction. And that's why it's required that they do that deed restriction so it stays there. So personally, like I said, a lot of me wishes we didn't have so many of these darn regulations, because what it does is it hinders things like this from happening, which is exactly what's happening right now with our housing problem. Is it hinders because how many people are willing to take on a 30-year commitment when they go into the project? Not very many, which has been a real hindrance for people building housing and low-income housing. So I just want it to be standard across the board, is all I'm saying. And so I just want to make sure that we're looking out for that ahead of time. So, you know, 10 years from now, we don't find out, oh, wait a minute, they haven't been doing it. And then we lose all of our CDBG funds because we weren't going beyond that 5-10 years when you're not here and somebody else is not here and there's been a changing in staff and all those sorts of things. So that's my concern.
Rick?
So I have a question. On the last page, attachment A indicates the list of items that represent the total amount for the CVD grant. Those costs have been incurred at this point, so it's a reimbursement rather than projected, or?
No, those costs have not been incurred. They cannot incur, CDBG funds cannot cover any costs that are incurred. The project is waiting for approval from you, and once we have that approval and the minor amendments are signed, then I can go ahead, and I've already done the environmental review. I have all the paperwork ready. The subrecipient agreement is a draft of what it will be for them, and both Chad Hansen and Justin Gerlitz have approved what the language in the subrecipient agreement, as well as the SOW, the scope of work. And they cannot begin work until I send them a notice to proceed, which upon your approval, then I would gather all my other material together and send that out to them so they can begin. So no, we do not cover any costs that have been incurred.
Okay, and last question. On this project, is there an estimate how many parcels or lots would be involved, or how many potential dwellings?
We have 22 in this particular subdivision.
22 lots?
And 3 of the lots are Habitat for Humanity.
So 3 out of the 22?
No, all 22. There's 22 lots total in the subdivision. 3 of those are Habitat Humanity has control of those.
And the other lots are private?
3 for Habitat and the rest would be through home bridging.
Yeah, 3 would be Habitat, and the remaining are home bridging.
And
22 total.
okay, good. All right. And just clarifying again, home bridge, and I know Habitat is focuses on a certain segment of the community, home bridging as well.
Yes, for this particular subdivision, home bridging has assured us that it will be low to moderate. It'll be open to all people, low to moderate income.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Mm-hmm.
Rob, then Joel.
So thanks, Valerie, for all the detailed thought you put in that. I think those are really valid points that we need to have clarified. Beyond, I shouldn't say, but in addition to that, it's my understanding that the home bridging program is to basically get low or moderate income renters out of the cycle of renting and have them be put in a position where they develop equity and will take pride in their home ownership and all that sort of thing. So that brings up another question. It wouldn't really matter whether or not someone were of low or moderate means when they first are put into the house, or they become homeowners. A year later, you know, they can win the lottery and not be low income anymore. So the question is for a rental situation, I think all of Valerie's questions are really very valid and we need answers for it. But for a program that clearly is intended, as my understanding, and I've spoken to some people that are closer to the situation than I am, in addition to reading in detail what the home bridging program has online, their whole goal is to create new homeowners. Now, once they've created that new homeowner, they have no say, or they have no control over whether or not that person stays low to moderate income forever. And so now one of the ideas is for them to develop equity and pride in home ownership. When they go to sell it, do they lose all that equity because they've got to sell it to another person that's, you know, low income? So I guess that needs to be clarified to me. Valerie's questions relating to a rental situation are very valid, but as far as putting some people in to become owners and develop equity, that brings another round of answers that I think we need. You know, is without deed restrictions, and then it would be kind of meaningless. And in addition, the people that are there, hopefully becoming part of the American dream and so forth, do they have restrictions that they even know about when they're going in, when they acquire their home to begin with? So there's a rental part of that question, but there's an owner part of that question that I've never really heard of before and I haven't seen addressed yet. Do you understand my question or my concern?
Yes, I do.
So it's two different things, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Did you have a question that you wanted answered right now, Rob?
I mean, I want clarification on whether or not when you put somebody in a home and they become an owner, as a low-income owner, are they then allowed to become a millionaire and still be part of this program? And if they do, are there restrictions on when they go to sell the house later to another low-income person, or do they get to keep their equity even though they're no longer low income? Which we hope they're not going to be low income for the 30 years or for however long they're going to own the home. But what kind of situations that create as far as who they can sell the home to and whether or not they can make the profit on it, like any other homeowner could. Because I think, if I'm not mistaken, the rest of the home bridging program is set up that way. Put a low-income person in, their house hopefully goes up in value, they then can cash in however many years later. But in other words, they can make a profit. This, though, they'd be making a profit on a HUD investment. I'm not sure that's appropriate.
I understand your concern. I think and I understand what Councilor Lovelace is saying with a 30-year deed trust, since I did look into that. And then also the question that comes up with the rental that you're asking. The CDBG funds for this project are just for public improvements. It's the public infrastructure. It is not the homes. We're not giving loans and using CDBG funds for the homes. So it's just the public infrastructure. And in doing this, you are allowing home bridging to lower the value of the homes so that more people are eligible, low income, moderate income, to purchase the homes. So we're not going to be really involved with the loan process and the home ownership and the rentals because we're just doing the public infrastructure. We're not involved with the building of the homes, the loans for the homes, and the subrecipient agreement. I know it was a lot to look at, is pretty much boilerplate. Some of that language as to your reporting and stuff like that is not applicable to this particular public infrastructure. It's a one-time shot. They're going to do it in phases, and when they're done, they're done. They'll report back to us at the completion of each phase. So then, once that's completed, then home bridging or whoever is the developer will go in and start building their homes. But the public infrastructure has to be completed before they can start on the building of the homes. So once the public infrastructure is in, CDBG funds are reimbursed for those costs only, and then it's a done deal. The rest, and so the subrecipient agreement that you have before you is just for the public infrastructure. It has nothing to do with the building of the homes because we can't give CDBG money for new construction. I don't know if that helps any.
I just want to follow up on that. And like I said, I don't want to be the person not wanting houses to be built for low income. Trust me, I do. I just want to see more of this being used on and on continually. And I believe in the infrastructure part of it. But if I'm not interested, I thought you said that it would be reimbursed. So who, am I correct to saying that money will be reimbursed back to that fund?
No, the reimbursement will go to for the cost of the public infrastructure. On the scope of work attached to the subrecipient agreement is the first phase of the cost to do the public infrastructure. your streets, curbs, gutters, sidewalks. Once they present us an invoice when that work is done, then that's when CDBG reimburses the funds for what they've done and what they've agreed to in their subrecipient agreement. It's a set amount.
Right, that they're going to. I guess I'm just trying to figure out how to use this for other housing, because we are also talking about doing infrastructure using ARPA funds kind of the same way. And I know that when we go to do that, I know that it was my understanding to do that, that it would have to be affordable housing with deed restrictions to do it. So that's why I want to say, if this works and this can happen, I see that's wonderful. But I do know that in the other scheme of things, we often are caught up in those 30-year deed restrictions that totally limits a lot. So that's
yes,
my
and I
angle.
understand that. And the HUD representative, I was clear to her back in the beginning of this year as to what we were going to be doing. And her memo back to us was, it's a doable project, not a problem with HUD.
Okay. Thank you.
Joel, then Rick.
So I just want to state back what I think I heard, and you correct me where I make a mistake. Is that okay?
That's fine.
Okay. From what I've heard, we're not funding low-income housing here. We're funding infrastructure for Habitat for Humanity or two nonprofits, and then they're going to provide the resources for low-income housing that will not have a deed restriction or an income restriction in the future beyond I guess, the initial transaction.
That is correct. We're providing the infrastructure. We're not providing CDBG funds for them to build the homes.
Okay, and in that way, hopefully 30 homes?
22 lots.
22 lots, then 22 people would have the opportunity, or 22 families would have the opportunity.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Rick.
And you answered a lot of my questions and clarified.
Makes a lot more sense.
Specifying
Go ahead.
this is just for the infrastructure. What does concern me a little bit though, and it may exceed our authority, that if somebody moved into this low-income house and within 2 years flipped it, we have no authority or opportunity to put a deed restriction on there that they must stay there for 5 years, or that house must stay under low-income status of some sort?
To my understanding, with the conversations from our HUD representative, we're just funding the infrastructure. We don't have any say in that down the line.
Okay, thank you.
Brian.
Yeah, thank you. What ability does the city have to ensure that the application process for the homes is fair and equitable? Because we're funding the infrastructure piece, but as far as the home bridging program itself, what ability does the city have to ensure that the application process they use to pick applicants is fair and equitable according to HUD standards?
Again, we're not using CDBG funds for the homes. So I understand, I fully understand where you're all going, because I went there myself early this year. And I reached out to enough of people and did enough research that once the public infrastructure is in, which is what the CDBG money will be used for, how they develop the homes, who buys the homes, is up to that particular developer. Home bridging, I understand, does have their own application process. They have assured us it is open for everyone in the low to moderate income. And as to the application process for the homes, CDBG will not be involved with that. So I know I know what you're saying. The two are, in order to develop the homes, you have to have the public infrastructure. We're just going to help with the public infrastructure. The development of the homes is going to be follow the guidelines of whoever, in this case, Home Bridging is, and how their application process works. And from what Councilor Pell said, he's looked into and he's familiar with the Home Bridging process, and that they work with low and moderate income people. Does that help some?
Not particularly, Aaron.
So I want to just, there's been some conversation, I want to address some of it, some of what Valerie and what Rob was saying when it comes to HUD and stuff. So this project does fund just the infrastructure. It doesn't go into the boundary of we are funding houses, which is another level of participation and support. If we were utilizing HUD dollars specifically for housing, I think we would need to look at deed restrictions on those properties and those homes. In this situation, my understanding, the majority or all of the funding is primarily private in donation in nature in order to make this happen. So they're not seeking HUD dollars from the city to build the houses, just for infrastructure, which has been deemed an allowable use. To answer some of your questions, though, with regards to what happens if 2 years later they want to sell the house, etc. In particular with HUD, the HUD program, and I'll quote the HUD program here when it comes to continued affordability. Subdivisions are homes that are deed restricted in compliance with HUD states under continued affordability. In addition to ensuring that the home assisted home buyer, now that's when the original home buyer sells the home, that they do receive a fair return on their investment. And that's part of the HUD program, is if someone is in an affordable housing home and they've built equity over 5 years or something, that they do want to show and provide that original homeowner a fair return on their investment. The sponsoring entity, whether it be, say, a housing authority or Habitat for Humanity, or whatever it is, does have a requirement to make sure that the house continues after the sale under a resale provision will remain affordable to a reasonable range of low-income home buyers. So there's a point where some of the investment is returned to the original recipient of the home when they sell, but that home, when it comes to the resale, has to be maintained in whatever that level now is for low to moderate income housing. Now, I'm not saying that's this situation, but there is a number of questions pertaining to that. There is a specific system, and HUD does have it defined, on how original homeowners and also subsequent homeowners in a deed restriction affordable housing project, how those transactions occur.
But that comes with a deed restriction.
Yes, and it's my understanding at the moment that these homes aren't specifically going for deed restriction. They're focused on individuals or families that are low to moderate income, and that's what these nonprofit projects are, like Habitat for Humanity. And that's what allows the city to utilize some of its block grant dollars for infrastructure. Now, we're not going on the property and doing improvements, so that's another level of discussion. Does that answer your question, Councilor Lois?
Well, it answers my questions, but I still, like I said, I just worry, and Rick brought up the same thing, is the fact that you get somebody in there, they flip the house, and then the benefit that came from us spending $400,000 for the infrastructure is gone, in 10 years. And that is, because I know most of these programs are designed long-term to return value to that class of people over time, and that, I don't want to lose that.
Yeah, without a deed restriction program, then that would be a valid concern or discussion point.
Just to clarify here, was the request to reallocate $55,000? That's what we had in the memo last week? No?
No, that is for a single year.
That
The
was just
full
the 1
request
year?
is about $360,000.
Okay. And Brian, did you get your question answered about the application process?
No, I need to follow up. So it sounds like if we decide to fund this infrastructure, that home bridging, in theory, with whatever application process they decide to use for picking applicants for these homes, in theory, they could pick 22 members of the congregation that they are associated with without any sort of oversight from the city or any other entity. Is that accurate?
Chad Hansen has assured us that in order to receive these funds for the infrastructure, that the application process is open to everyone, not just with the church.
And how has he, is that a verbal assurance? Has he provided documentation? I believe there was documentation provided as cited in the memo that we received, and I requested a copy of that documentation about a week ago, and I still haven't received it.
The assurance would be the sub-recipient agreement that they'd have to sign. That would be the insurance that they'd have to hold to, and if they didn't, then they'd be liable for those expenses and not allowed to receive the benefit of the HUD program.
So forgive me for not reading the entire sub-recipient agreement. It is fairly boilerplate, as you said. However, does that provide the city the opportunity to look at the application process, look at their scoring criteria? The city needs to know how they are picking the successful applicants for this process. Otherwise, it is not an open process. So how are we ensuring that?
I guess what we could do is check in with monitoring with them as the project continues. I don't know when they'll be developing the homes on this project. So the infrastructure comes first, and once that's completed, then we reimburse the funds for that. Then I believe that the city could monitor their application process. I don't know when they'll be developing, so that will be something that home bridging may have to notify us of, because I'm not sure the application process that they will be using for this particular subdivision. Would that satisfy your question?
So, and to further answer that, and yes, the city does have the authority to monitor their application process. That's technically our responsibility to make sure that they're also complying.
Okay, I would like to know, like, where in the agreement it explicitly states that before.
It states it under number 5, section 1. Performance monitoring. The city will monitor the performance of the recipient relative to the goals and the outcomes described in this agreement. And it continues to go on.
Okay, I'm good for now.
Rob?
So I'd like to know how someone who's not either a member of the congregation or has a close relationship with a member of the congregation would even find out about this program. How does Home Bridgings intend to advertise it for the general public to be able to apply? I mean, they may not have a single application that comes from anywhere outside of their church if that's the only place that it's advertised. So, I mean, to me, having, we'll say a quarter-page ad in the Daily Courier once a month would probably let people know that this project or this program even exists, people outside the congregation. But I see nothing here that would indicate, if you don't happen to go on the Edgewater website, you would never know about this. So I'd like to know what assurances we have that the general public would even know about the program.
I would have to check with Chad Hansen. I do not know how they are going to advertise for this particular subdivision. Like I say, the development of the homes, the infrastructure in and of itself, phase one should run into August, possibly September. Then I don't know from Home Bridging or Habitat for Humanity when they're going to begin developing the homes. So I don't know how they're going to advertise for this outside of I understand what you're saying.
Right.
They need to have some kind of advertising out there for the general public and not just for the church.
Yeah, that should be pretty obvious, at least to me it is. Thank you for understanding that. The other, I guess there's a couple other points. I want to also say that I really, really like the sound of this program, even though I may not have expressed that. I think I said that last week. And I wish that, I love the fact that the church would get involved on this level. And I love the fact that, I would hope that other churches would take this example. With regards to the infrastructure only, or we'll say the line in the sand, or the demarcation between cost of infrastructure and the cost of housing, I mean, I would imagine that if any developer is going to put a subdivision in, they're going to have to pencil the cost of the infrastructure into their project, and that's going to be prorated onto the cost of every home. So the cost of the infrastructure is clearly part of the cost of this project, and it clearly is part of the house, you know, the cost of building that house. If HUD, you know, is okay with, or if HUD specifically looks at those two things as different, you know, that's HUD, and it's their money and it's their program, you know, and I would defer to them, you know. But I would also like to make the point that the cost of the infrastructure for any other builder and any other subdivision is going to be included in the price of every home. So let's not act as if, you know, the infrastructure costs are different than the housing costs, because it's all one, really. But if it's okay with HUD, I mean, and if Augustus feels that it's okay with HUD based on what he's done, then, you know, I'm fine with his investigation on it.
So HUD does treat the infrastructure it's the public infrastructure, right? And then the cost of the loans for the house, or the cost of the house itself. HUD clearly, they treat those two issues as separate. And that's the inclination that we've gotten from HUD's representative.
Kurt, did you have a question? Yeah, if you don't, it's fine. I can't tell if your hand's up. Okay.
So will these funds be paying the entire infrastructure? I mean, will it be paying for not only the water lines, but the branches directly to each lot?
Are you talking about the laterals to each
Yeah.
lot? Is that what it is? Yes, the public infrastructure is streets, curbs, gutters, sidewalk. In your scope of work attached to the subrecipient agreement is the breakdown of the costs for all of the work that will be done for the public infrastructure.
Okay. So,
And I'm sorry, this money in this subrecipient agreement is just for phase one. It will cover Redfin and some improvements that need to be done to George Tweed. There is another street, Family Lane, I believe it is, that will be done in another phase. And that is not included in the subrecipient agreement. It's just the other two for right now.
all right. So we are subsidizing a significant portion of each home built, in a sense. Okay. So just to restate what I understand here, along with Joel, I mean, really what we're talking about is the source of the money here. If this was a development in some other part where we were trying to incentivize that development, we would pay infrastructure costs and we would get houses out of it. Just the fact that it's a block grant because we're dealing with nonprofits, right? That's really why we're scrutinizing this. But in the end, we're going to get 22 new taxpayers are going to get 22 new utility customers out of this deal. And we're dealing with a nonprofit, so we have to have some level of trust. So, I mean, I've been on both sides of this issue multiple times throughout this conversation, but, you know, when you explained it's really infrastructure, okay, I think we're overthinking this.
Councillor Collins, if I may, Justin Gerlich's just told me that it's just the public infrastructure, not the laterals to the homes that are going to be involved with
Okay,
this.
that's even better.
Aaron, did you have something? No? Okay, Joel.
I was wondering, is it appropriate to put into the sub-recipient agreement that the Habitat for Humanity and the other one, Home Bridging, would prepare a, what do you want to call it, not an RFP, but a process by which they screen applicants subject to city approval to make sure that we comply with that one as a part of our monitoring process? Would that be appropriate or not? And yes or no, I just need to know what the facts are.
I don't think that that would be appropriate based on the fact that the CDBG funds are going towards just the public infrastructure, because at that point, you're kind of getting into the process by which they make their, I mean, the point is we're going to have monitoring power over this anyway. You're kind of delving more than what you would want to delve in based on this sub-recipient agreement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Brian?
Are we in discussion yet, or just?
I think are we still asking questions? Are you done with questions?
I had another question.
Okay, go ahead.
So Joel just asked if it would be appropriate for us to, you know, be able to make sure that the application process is fair and equitable, and you said no, but then you also said in paragraph 5 in performance monitoring, it allows us to do that already, which is a yes.
So the difference is you'd be conditioning the funds for the CDBG grant that are going towards public infrastructure. You would be basing that decision, which has already been established as a separate issue from the building of houses and the selection process. You'd be conditioning the receipt of those funds for public infrastructure on their process. And I don't think that that's appropriate. You're going to be monitoring their processes, and so you're going to be able to see what they're doing as it starts. But I don't feel it's appropriate to condition the funds that are being allocated for public infrastructure based on their process.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but the performance monitoring clause seems to be more revolving around the appropriate reimbursement of funds as it relates to work being done. And it doesn't necessarily give the city the ability to make sure that the process by which applicants are chosen is fair and equitable. Would that be an accurate statement? Or I'm just trying to figure out how the city ensures that this entity is using taxpayer money in a fair way when they're picking their applicants, and I don't have that answer yet.
But they're not using taxpayer money to pick their applicants. The taxpayer money is going into the public infrastructure, and HUD treats those two issues as separate already. So it's not, no public money is going to the building of these houses. It's not going to individuals. It's going into the public infrastructure necessary for the lots. So you're placing a condition that's separate and distinct from the public infrastructure onto whether or not home bridging is going to get the infrastructure funding.
Does the city have the ability to add that condition to the agreement if they so chose?
Well, my understanding is that the subrecipient agreement is boilerplate, so ostensibly everybody's getting the same agreement. So if it were changed in this agreement, I would think it would need to be changed in all agreements going forward. As to whether it's appropriate, staff can do more research into that. I don't think that that's going to be a super intensive question, but I can't tell you off the top of my head. It's a little harder.
Thank you.
Valerie?
Well, that brings me to my question of when we give money to, say, the Boys and Girls Club, and we give money to Hearts with a Mission, and we give money to all of those organizations, which they've all received it, Maslow Club, they have to provide the information that shows that those people were low to medium income. I mean, that's a requirement for receiving the funds, am I correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so I don't understand, I guess, why that wouldn't be the same for this organization to show that the people that they have given the houses to are people who are lower income, which comes down to that part of it. So that kind of is what confuses me. I keep wanting to get into the discussion part of it because I think there's a piece that has not been added to this conversation. And I don't know exactly if I have whatever.
I think legally what Augustus was saying, and maybe I want him to correct me if I'm wrong, he had some legal concerns or questions with regards to us stipulating a process that they would have to use. However, the agreement does state that they have to be, non-exclusive, and there's a number of categories that you have to make sure that, there we go, the affirmative action and equal opportunity has to be complied with. So when it comes to their application process, I think the city has the ability to ask for their information on their application process, but maybe not go as far as to, this is what we want to see in your application process. Is that a better way of explaining it, Augustus?
I think that that's an appropriate way of explaining it, especially given the first sentence, the recipient will provide services to all clients meeting eligibility requirements without respect to the protected classes that are listed.
So they have to go into their application process if they're going to sign this agreement recognizing the affirmative action and equal opportunity clause. And their application process needs to comply with that. And we could review their application process as it shows here, performance monitoring. We can monitor their application process.
Okay, I'm just going to be honest here because I listened to the pastor of the Edgewater sermon on Sunday, just shortly before I came here, and he specifically said that all of the programs they support for people who honor Jesus. I honor Jesus. But to me, that is not being fair and equitable. And that's my concern. If I hadn't have heard that sermon this morning, I might have felt a whole lot different. But I heard it from the leader of the church saying, we do this, we do this, and we do this because we do that for Christians. And if they're not a Christian, then they don't deserve that. And that's what I heard. And so it makes me want to step back and go, okay, I want to see it marketed. I want this to happen. I do. But when the leader of the church is the person who is instructing the people that that's how it is going to be, then I think that's misinformation as how it has to be. So I want these 22 homes. I want there to be low-income assistance. I want all that, but I also want to see it marketed that way, and I want to see it led that way for a series of time. Because to me, to spend that money, taxpayer money, without that guarantee is totally against what CDBG is meant to be, and that's my concern.
Yeah, and I think that's a concern that's shared amongst other council members just based on the discussion. And that's a realm that staff does not feel comfortable getting into. That really is your role as a policy board to try to identify and interpret that. We're here to provide you the black and white to tell you what you can legally or what you can legally do and how you can monitor that. So we're trying to assist you in that with those questions. But then that next level of discovery that you're talking about really needs to occur on the dais with your fellow council members.
Which is exactly why I hesitate. I would never have hesitated if I had not listened to that this morning, because I was also inferred, as Rob will say, that it is the evil rulers of the city and state that are corrupt and are, and it's just like, seriously, I don't know. I guess it upsets me to think that I'm considered a corrupt person for wanting to help anybody, whether they are Christian, non-Christian, whatever. And I think that's what CDBG stands for, is helping everybody. So that is my concern. And I don't know whether I would like to have something from the church that comes back and says, oh, we didn't mean that. We didn't really mean that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me to just blatantly give my permission for that right now, it goes against everything in my spiritual heart that I believe in. And so that's why I'm in the position that I am right now, is that I don't know how, unless we can say, perfect, we can give infrastructure to any builder who wants infrastructure, who just promises to do low-income housing, because that's a good thing to do. And I'm not saying the CDBG program going to do that. So that's where my consumption is just like, what? You know, I hear one thing and then I hear another thing here. Are we just kind of making and bending the rules so they work when we want them to work? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're just trying to explain the rules. I don't think council or staff is trying to bend any rules. I think we're just trying to determine and identify how you can apply those resources to the rules. The aspect of a general builder getting these versus a nonprofit that has a mission with regards to low to moderate income, that's sort of the difference. Like you said, Maslow Project, Hearts with a Mission, they're a nonprofit that has a mission that serves, and so this is sort of the home bridging thing. So that's something you need to, I think council will likely have further conversation on, along with, you mentioned the church a number of times. I think council needs to have a discussion on the dais with regards to, is there a true separation between the nonprofit that's asking for the money and the church? Because obviously I think there's a concern that it's closely linked. That's something that I think needs further discussion from the council.
All right. Rob, do you have a question?
I guess it would probably be appropriate, I guess, I'm asking Augustus or whoever, but it'd probably be appropriate for the entire council to hear the sermon yesterday from Reverend Heverly, or maybe you'd like to hear it also, Augustus, because I completely agree with Valerie's interpretation of his words. When people say things, I generally take them on face value, and I generally, agree. I know last week I asked about the words that they used about planting missionaries all over the community, and you didn't seem to have a problem with that as being, exclusionary. Yeah. I think that yesterday's sermon took that even to another level, but I think that we probably all should hear that before we make a decision. I would imagine including you too, Augustus.
Yes, I think that after hearing that from Councilor Lovelace, I would be interested in hearing the sermon in whole.
Rick?
And at the beginning of the presentation, it was mentioned that this is to do housekeeping on the CDBG funds, and we do have deadlines. What is our deadline on these monies again?
Well, this is not all of the money. This is a good portion of the money that we're trying to move. Our deadline is August 2nd. So the minor amendments, we're already midway through June. The minor amendments go hand in hand with this particular project because we're trying to move $364,000 of our past funds into something that's active. Our monitoring, of course, I am in the process of putting a new plan together. In order to do that, I need to kind of know, I already know which activities I have canceled that have been inactive in past years, and I have reallocated those funds to active activities, and this is where a lot of those funds are going to go. So if I can build this into the monitoring plan that I have to give to HUD, that would be helpful in showing them that the city is not just sitting on this money, that we are moving it. Whereas, the longer we sit on it, the more HUD is on us to spend it. And we did receive, I'm also putting together the new annual action plan, which will come before you in August, which that begins this October. So if we don't move these funds here within the next week or so, HUD is going to reevaluate us and could quite possibly take our funds away.
So we do have one more week to make up if we feel we need the extra time to clarify some
I
things?
think another week is not going to be that difficult. It's just that like I say, I'll be working on the plan. It would be nice to know within a week if we are going to be able to move these funds, because these minor amendments are what HUD wants to look at.
Okay, thank you.
Brian, Joel.
So I'm glad that we have a little bit of time to sort this out. If for whatever reason we are not able to get there with what council's going to need to move forward on this housing project, is there a potential plan B? Is there a backup plan? Is there another place that these funds could potentially be allocated in case we're not able to get there on this?
No, I have already moved each annual grant year, we can only move administratively where the city manager can sign off a certain amount of funds. That's what all four of these minor amendments are for. I don't have other activities that would use this type of funds all at one time. They would still be, I have moved them to a couple other, but they would still just be sitting there, not showing that they're moving. So this particular activity is one that would use a good chunk of the money, and HUD would be happy to see us move that money.
So did you just say we don't really have a choice to move it here? That it's already done?
No, it's not done. It's just I do not have any other activities out there that are large enough that would use this much of the funds. It would go to other activities. I have, we had to do away with our makerspace for this time around because we had about 150,000 sitting in there that, you know, we were assured early on, couple years back, that was a due thing. Then funds at RCC went blank, and then nothing is going forward. So I had to cancel those activities. There's some weatherization that I have past years that I have canceled because the projects aren't out there. And of course, COVID played, you know, for 2 years a lot with all of this as well. I also have public facilities, but I have a good amount of funds in that particular activity, and we're ramping up the parks and doing some improvements with those funds. I'm already sitting on quite a bit of funds that are in other activities that are actually moving. Most of the ones that, you know, like Councilor Lovelace mentioned, Hearts with a Mission and Boys and Girls Club, those are public service ones. They have to do the income. They have to report the ethnicities. They have to do that, but they're also restricted to a 15% of the funds, which is really nothing. So they're not even involved in this equation, so to speak, with large projects, capital projects, and public service. They're pretty much two separate animals in this. But I don't have, Amber, Neek, and I have started to ramp up the weatherization, so would like to put that out to more people. But we're not receiving that back. The program that is really moving now is rehabilitation of rentals and homes. But those are small, you know, maybe 10,000 here, 15,000 there. And they don't happen really quickly. I mean, you need time to do all of this. And those are moving along fairly quickly. But I do not have any other programs unless there's another development out there. But if it's going to be an issue with public infrastructure and how to apply the funds each time we have one of these, then those projects will just sit until a decision is made. So I don't know if that helps you.
Okay, so just to be clear for anyone listening, I really hope we can figure this out, and I don't want to have to look at reallocating to something else, but could the city put out an RFP to find a contractor to do weatherization with that money in theory?
Well, we really don't need an RFP. Our weatherization, what we've done with that is we've created an application which Amber and I we've already sent it out to, UCAN was our partner in this, but they are not able to take this on. So I reached out to 2 other people to help us with the weatherization program. One already does the rehab, and they said they would incorporate the weatherization into their rehab. The other partner is county, and she can only do a few weatherization. So Amber and I have already sent out off of UCAN's waiting list letters to all the people that were on that list, asking them if they would like to, the program's running, we have funds. And I've had out of maybe 25 letters that we sent out, 1 response. So it's not really a matter of, that's why a lot of the activities are stalling, is because we don't have the response back from the people who, could use the help.
Thank you.
Joel?
One of the things that strikes me is in monitoring minister sermons, and for government to monitor minister sermons, and then to make policy based on what they say or don't say. And there's some valid concerns here, but that frightens me a little bit in terms of where that has been abused in other governments. Not that we've crossed the line here, but having talked with people that in other countries where a government representative is present there and monitors what people say to make sure that it's politically correct. That's a little scary. The other thing is, I wonder, I don't know Matt. I got an appointment to speak with him, and I need to express the concerns that I've heard today here, but that, I think everybody deserves that one-on-one conversation rather than in his own circle talking to his own congregation versus what he does as a public policy with requirements from HUD and what's legal. And if he's talking to his own congregation on how they should invest their money, and they probably support the Gospel Rescue Mission for the reasons that he stated, that's one thing. If it's he's going to twist government funding to serve that same function, which I would doubt, but if that was his intent, then that's another thing. So it's kind of like talking to the priest whose church runs Providence Hospital. I'm sure if you monitored that priest and you tried to put it into the administrative policies of the hospital, there would be some incongruities that would not be legal. But that wasn't the priest's intent. So what I would encourage us to do is to go one-on-one with Matt, say what can you do to allay our concerns, and if those are allayed, then we move forward.
I suppose we've moved on to discussion now. Do other people have questions still?
No.
Okay, I think we're done with the questions for the moment. Rob and then Val.
So Joel, I appreciate, your point of view. I would have a different opinion as far as us going one-on-one with the minister of that church. I think is very inappropriate. I think he needs to go 9-on-1. He needs to talk to all of us. We all need to have read the transcript or listened to his opinion on this matter yesterday. I did, and I think his opinion is very clear. I think it's consistent with the statement that they have on their website, planting missionaries throughout the community as a goal. I could be wrong, and I'd like to hear that from him. But, I really have a problem with, some of the language being, non-exclusive and so forth, and all the different language that would hopefully guarantee that this program is given on, applications and opportunities are given on a level playing field to everyone. But everything that I've heard from that church and everything I've seen on that website and everything I heard from the minister yesterday would not indicate that. So I need, you know, I need clarification. I think it should come 9-on-1 or 1-on-9 rather than 1-on-1.
You know, and I'm okay
Joel.
with that as well.
It's Valerie's turn.
Oh, okay.
Val?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, I have nothing against, you know, my daughter works for Christian, for Catholic Charities in Austin, and you know, I mean, that's what she does. And I like that combination of working. I've always said that we need to work together as a whole, so I'm not opposed to it, but I do know that there are legally things that are there for a purpose, and the reason that they're there for a purpose, and that's why dust deed restriction or some sort of guarantee or whatever is a piece of that puzzle. And that's why asking them maybe to come to the plate with some of those options or something, to be willing to do something like that, would just guarantee to me that that is their purpose, and that that would go beyond what I heard yesterday. Because like I said, I probably, if I hadn't listened to that sermon, would have felt very different coming in this room this morning than having listened to it. So that put fear in me of that. Church made me realize and understand why there is sometimes that division in church and state, which is what our country is built on for that very reason.
Joel?
I'm okay with that. As we move forward, I think we need to be careful too. It actually surprises me that a church would take government funds that maybe would require something that maybe is incongruent with their beliefs. It's also inappropriate, I think, for government to tell a pastor what he needs to say from the pulpit. That's not appropriate either. And I don't think that's what we're trying to do. At least I would hope not. And I just think we need some communication.
Yeah, it's kind of unfortunate. I mean, were they invited today? Because somebody sat here last week and I don't think we have a representative of the church here.
Yeah, the home bridging was notified that we were having this discussion today, and this may be something you want to table for next week, and we ask that they attend again and have someone present to answer some of the questions that that we here in the room can't answer.
Seems like that's where we're at. Go ahead, Rick.
As part of the discussion, I would be in favor of tabling it and having them here next week. And I would be interested to know how they're going to respond to this sub-recipient agreement that's up there, because I realize that is a qualification. But I also want to recognize Councillor Collins, that I agree with him. This is a totally separate process, not saying there aren't requirements, but I think we need to try and keep the issues separate. The other aspect go through too is we have these funds in basically a week to make a decision on, or even if our world is not perfect, we get infrastructure done and we're using federal money to do it. If there's some way we can do it and still be happy about it and feel that we're accomplishing something, that's something that we don't always get every day. Thank you.
All right, I think it sounds like the group would be interested in hearing from the home bridging about their application process. So if we could agree to table this for the moment and have them come back at some point in the near future, that would be great.
Mayor Bristol, may I clarify one thing? Chad Hansen, who is in charge of the home bridging, he is also a pastor considered a pastor at Edgewater. Do you want the main pastor to come, or do you want Chad Hansen to come and speak for the church?
Well, I think our questions are about the home bridging program, so whoever is the best representative to discuss the application requirements of home bridging would be ideal.
Okay, that would be Chad Hansen then. Not, I don't believe that's the same one that Counselor Lovelace was talking about.
No, it was a different pastor yesterday. Rob, then DJ.
Just to be clear, and I'm not sure if it's even going to be considered appropriate, but when you're going to reach out to them, I assume, I personally would like to hear how they plan on advertising it to outside of their congregation as well.
DJ?
Yeah, I think the only valid concern on the table here is equity. I see that one of the best ways that the city can contribute to our housing crisis is an infrastructure investment, and we have been proposed an infrastructure investment, and we don't like the way it's structured. Valerie's concern, I think, and I appreciate the way that she went out and just said it. We've all been dancing around it. Valerie said it very succinctly. If this program is only for believers of a faith, then I don't think that we can rightfully align. Personally, I hope that might be a misunderstanding. If we have a guarantee of equity, that's going to be good enough for me for an infrastructure investment with this money. I have no interest whatsoever in creating an agreement between the city for a public infrastructure investment to ensure that it's equitable. But I do need, before I approve it, of course, is to be sure that we're all on the same table here and that equity is at the front of the application. So it's going to take very little for me to be in strong favor of this investment. So yeah, I'm in favor of bringing this back next week.
All right, thank you. Okay.
So just moving forward, just to make sure clear expectations are there, that we will try and get them, and if they can be present for the June 20th workshop, we'll have them at the June 20th workshop to have this discussion again.
That would be great. And if that time doesn't work, we can find another time. But yeah, it sounds like.
Aaron, so I would imagine this is the case, but I don't want to assume that if Chad is going to come and speak, that he is word for word intimately familiar with the words of Reverend Heverly yesterday. I don't want him to say he didn't understand or he not sure of what the meaning was. No, I want to know word for word exactly. So from whoever shows up, it could be both of them or one of them, but I don't want to have them pointing fingers at each other.
All right, thanks. Yeah, we'll address this again and get some of our questions answered about how that program is intended to work. Next up, Counselor Stipends.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Hopefully these get easier because I got the next two, so I'm hoping that we're already on the downslope. I'm here just to provide you with some information on counselor pay. So council going to have a discussion on this topic. So council, as mentioned, council showed an interest in having a discussion on mayor and council salary with regards to serving the community. Just general background, I've got some general background for you, and then what some of the other communities are doing throughout the state of Oregon, and then turning it back over to you. Just general background, we have had discussions before in the past with regards to compensation for mayor and council. If we did something along these lines, it would require a charter change, and any charter change does require a vote of the electors. So in 2019, we had a charter suggested change where there were a couple of issues. One was payment for mayor councilors, $1,000 per month, special meeting, mayor's veto power, and council vacancies. That measure failed 20% to 79%. And then a similar charter change was sent out to the voters minus the mayor council pay, and it was also rejected 43% to 56%. LLC had some numbers that we were able to get for you that shows the different ways that counselors are or have some kind of ability to have a return on their investment with regards to their timing and also sometimes their personal dollars as they're spent in their official capacity as a city council member. From travel reimbursement, continuing education, membership dues and fees, monthly stipend, general reimbursement, technology stipend, cell phone stipend, salary, car allotment, and also health insurance. The major three ones are up there at 61, 57, and 50% of the cities show that they do travel reimbursement, continuing education, and membership dues and fees. So of the top 5 there, the city is currently doing 4. We do travel reimbursement, continuing education, membership dues and fees, and just general reimbursement of expenditures that you may have serving in your capacity as a council member. The next 3 slides provide you with some details on what the stipends are, or compensation are for elected officials in some of the other communities throughout the state of Oregon. I don't know if I need to go through each one of these. It is in your handout that you have here, but it does show that there are a number of cities that provide, whether it be a monthly fee or a per meeting fee, or even both, along with a reimbursement for things like IT, like internet services, so you have internet. Just on this slide here, it shows number ranges from $10 a meeting to $225 for the mayor, $150 for council president, and $125 for council with a $75 tech fee, all the way down to $10 a meeting to $38 utility fee reduction on a monthly basis. So some communities have gotten creative to some degree in providing some form of compensation for council. The next group of cities have something similar, with Hillsborough coming out really on top with the mayor at $2,000, council president at $500, council at $300, and then Island City also has mayor at $1,000 with council at $45 per month. And then the third slide just showing that there are cities and what they do for councilor stipends or reimbursement is there in front of you. Tigard being a big one for the mayor, with council receiving $523. And this one is interesting. They do provide some health insurance for the elected officials and a $275 car allotment. So with that, hopefully that was some information that will help you with your discussions. The council action is at your discretion. The November election does require council approval of a resolution and ballot title and explanatory statement by August 3rd of this year and actually that's supposed to be 2022, sorry, for a filing date of August 19th. So we have to file August 19th if we are going to put something on the ballot. Potential actions for you is to provide direction to prepare a ballot title and resolution before August 3rd, hold additional workshops for further discovery and deliberation, or maintain it as status quo. And with that, Mayor, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. Council, do you have any questions?
I have a question.
Rob?
Yeah. So, Aaron, are all of these, or do you know, council manager form of government? Because the ones that have the big disparity between a mayor and council, I have to wonder if they even have a city manager in those towns.
That's a good question. I didn't have the opportunity to look at each one of those. I know there are a few that are a strong mayor versus a council manager form of government, and that may be the case in those, Councilor Bell.
Any other questions? All right, we will open it up for discussion. Thank you, Aaron. Rob?
Let's start, yeah. Well, I have, several years ago, I made a proposal to the council at that time that I think was pretty well balanced about why and how, why I thought that councilors and the city deserves to have paid councilors. I was on the Charter Task Force in 2018, and when we formulated the changes that went on the ballot, and I can give people some background or opinions as to how those came about. There's one of them in particular that we probably would want to know about. But as far as pay goes, my really big concern now is that when I looked at 2008, when I ran for council last time, or the first time I should say, first time I guess, was we had a lot of people applying and running for office, and we had very, very qualified, in some cases in the same ward, qualified people. We had Gary Berlant and Richard Michelin running against each other, both tremendous qualifications, and the public had some really great choices there. You know, I don't remember any time anyone having running unopposed back in the day, and it could have happened, but I don't remember it. As we've gone along in the last decade, we have more and more unopposed races, and that really concerns me because we have less and less people that are likely to be represented. We have retired people that are more likely to be more represented if you look at the age of our council for the most part. And then what really concerned me is when we had to fill the vacancy for, when Dennis Roller resigned and we had to fill the vacancy that Kurt now holds, we had, you know, some really, you know, well-meaning people applied and some candidates were really good. We did have one person, when they were asked, when we interviewed, you know, what do you feel the role of the city council is? And this person said that they had no idea. And to me, obviously that was a person that we didn't choose, but if a person like that were the only one to apply or the only one to run for a given position and they ran unopposed, we'd have a person with that level of naivete or that level of inexperience as a city councilor. And for me, a person like that would be very, very easy to manipulate. Other councilors could potentially manipulate them, or the staff could potentially manipulate them as they learn and as they get more confidence. But I wouldn't want to have really people that were completely and utterly inexperienced, have them be the only person. So I want to see the pool of candidates increased. And I know that there have been cities when they've started to pay councilors a stipend, the average age of their council went down to mid-60s, down to mid-30-year-olds, because very often mid-30-year-olds are still in the prime of their earning years. They need to make house payments, they need to have child care and so on and so forth. It's harder for them to get off work. But I think some amount of compensation to people like that will make it more likely that they could run. One other thing I would add, and before I listen to others, I can think of one of my daughters in particular is very level-headed. She's very fair. She's on the board of a local school, and I can tell you that she's a tremendous asset to any organization she was ever a part of. She would never in a million years run for Grants Pass City Council if there wasn't a way for her to gain something back that she could then share with her family. The time she would take away from her family, she would never do that as a volunteer because her family's too important to her. So someone like that could be encouraged to run if there was some compensation, and there's probably dozens more like her in town that would potentially be candidates that are now wouldn't even consider it because they're not compensated.
Val.
Well, I'll just say, for all those reasons, is why we did put it on the ballot. Is you're right. This job is a lot of work. It does take a lot of time away from family, and that was the whole discussion behind putting it out there. And for all the reasons that you just said, you know, I am in support of it. But I will have to admit that I'm also discouraged when I do look at what came back and what the voter came back with, and I'm not sure how to get the message out, because personally I feel so strongly about the importance of community service and giving back in some way. So, you know, a part of me says, if that's the only thing on there, I mean, I would be in favor of saying yes. I probably won't be around to get that benefit, but I agree. It's hard to, in this day and age, to have the kind of enthusiasm in the years past, and in terms of people wanting to serve their community for nothing. I'm thinking that's kind of history, and that's unfortunate, but I do think it's a reality. So, anyway, so those are my thoughts.
Anyone else? Rob?
When I, just to be clear, when I brought this up a couple years ago, same thing as I have in mind now, is because there's a lot of people in our community who appreciate the work that we do, or the effort we put in at least, if not the outcomes. There's also a lot of people who probably don't like government at any level. But the proposal that I would have is that pay would start in January of 2025, and that would give the public a chance to vote out anyone who's currently on the council. It would give the public a chance to run for office if they so chose, and they felt that they wanted to, and they felt income would make it would be the deciding factor. So I'm proposing that we would start councilor pay in January of 2025, when the public has had a chance to approve or disapprove through the vote of anybody that is currently on the council. That way, it's clearly not about us. It's not us feathering our own nest. I don't think that's anybody's, I know that that's nobody's intention who's currently on the council, but again, to give the public a chance to weigh in and get rid of us and run themselves if they want to. I think there was a couple reasons why there's several reasons why it may have gotten trounced in a couple years ago, and we can go over that. And there is one thing that I think would potentially go on the ballot that I don't think would be particularly objectionable. We can talk about what should be on there. Ideally, this should be I feel in my thinking that this would be the main issue people would vote on. There's one other smaller issue that I think could probably put on there that I don't think anyone would object to as well.
Well, I'll weigh in and just let you all know that when I was on the Yakima City Council before I moved back to Grants Pass, I had young children at that time who required babysitting, and we did have a counselor stipend of $1,000 a month there. And at that time, I was a small business owner, self-employed. Any time that I wasn't spending on building my business, was potentially a financial loss to me. So the ability to have that stipend did allow me to justify the time that I spent working on council instead of working on growing my own business. And then I did have some real costs associated with paying for childcare while I was at council meetings. So I do think that having some sort of stipend would open the doors to making the council more accessible to people who aren't either, retired, independently wealthy, in charge, at a position where they're in charge of their own prerogative at work. A lot of people who are business owners, they can come and go, whereas a lot of people who are employee status people maybe don't have that option, as well as having to pay for childcare. So throw that out there. Brian?
Yeah, I'm in favor for all the reasons that everyone's already stated, and I think that the key for me being in favor of it is the fact that everyone's going to be up for re-election before it goes into effect. So the public has the chance to replace any counselor before any counselor gets paid. So that was kind of the final hurdle for me to get over to be in favor. Thank you.
So we don't really have a specific proposal. We do have a wide variety of dollar amounts here to be considered. Do you want to just think on this, or is there a direction that anybody wants to go? Rob?
I don't know that we're necessarily ready today to come up with a dollar amount, but at least I'm not sure if I am. I feel that last time, I think that the $1,000 a month, quite frankly, was a hurdle that the public wasn't willing to accept. I know that in initial discussions in the Charter Task Force, I was very supportive of $300 a month. Many people felt that wasn't enough. We then kind of came to an agreement at $500 a month, and then somehow we came back to the next meeting, and obviously everyone except me had discussed it outside the meeting, and they decided on $1,000 a month, which I thought was just I had thought it had very little chance of passing. I think that's one of the reasons. I think the amount was too much. Another reason, and this was just kind of silly, but I heard it around town as a reason people voted against it, and I can understand. there was about, I'm trying to remember, there were several changes that were just grammar issues, just cleaning up grammar. It really had there was no change in the intent or anything like that. However, there was one on the issue of attendance, counselor attendance, where it said that any counselor who misses 3 consecutive meetings will be removed from council or gives up their seat. Okay, so that was, we put that on the ballot, and I'm sorry, to take that off, we took that off, took that clause off, and the reason we did is Mark Bartholomew felt that that's not even legally enforceable, that it's up to the public to elect or recall anyone who's on the council, and council rules cannot override that. But the fact is there are people out in the public who felt that, geez, counselors are asking for more pay, and yet they want to be able to have worse attendance. Those two things didn't go well at all, and the public didn't like it, and I totally understand that. I would suggest, not addressing that clause at all as far as allowing counselors to necessarily have less attendance. There's one other small clause that I think we could include if we were going to put something on the ballot. We can discuss, I'll just throw it out there. We had an issue, and Valerie, I'm sure that Rick would remember, and Valerie, I think you were on the council at that time. It was on the issue of special meeting. We had actually Mayor Fowler essentially circumvent the intent of the council. Councilors wanted to have a special meeting about a particular issue, and the issue doesn't even matter at this point. And because there was nothing in the charter that said how long, what time frame the mayor had to call a special meeting, Councilor Fowler did not call a special meeting during the month of December, and the councilors who are most concerned with having that meeting, their terms expired. So one of the changes that was on the ballot last time, and I feel should be on the ballot again, I don't have the language right in front of me, but it says that the mayor or I think any 3 councilors can call a special meeting in not less than 24 hours, meaning that if there's a reason for a special meeting to come up, the mayor can do it, or the councilors who are concerned can do it, and I don't think that the public would have any problem with that. But it would avoid the situation of the mayor being able to essentially override the wishes and the intent of the council, and I don't think that it will really make much difference to the voting public whether or not we make that small change. But as far as pay goes, I think that we should probably have either another meeting specifically focusing on that, or we can have a subcommittee to discuss that and give a recommendation. I think it should probably be, we should consider the number of hours, which I think I have considered, and I think all of us at some point have considered, but the minimum number of hours the job takes. But I personally think it should probably be in the $300 to $500 a month range. In that range, I think would be reasonable. I don't necessarily think it's quite enough, but I think the public might be able to embrace that. But that's kind of where I'm thinking would be somewhat reasonable, and that the public may actually, again, support that, between $300 and $500.
Brian.
Yeah, I guess if I'm just going to throw my opinion out on numbers. And just for the record, Councilor Auger sent a message to council today saying that she would be in favor of that number being $1,000 stipend. So just for the record, I personally feel that's a little high. However, when I look at the number of hours that I put in on council, even if it's $500 a month, it probably works out to be lower than minimum wage for me. So the number that I have in my head is somewhere between 500 and 750.
All right, I don't think we're really ready to make a decision on this today, so how do you want to form a subcommittee to discuss the issue? Do you want to have another workshop? Do you want to forget we ever mentioned it? Where do you want to go? Rick?
A memo or a survey of the council members may be appropriate, and then if another meeting's necessary, but that might be an alternative.
Okay, well, I'm going to throw out there that we start a subcommittee to have a discussion about it and bring back a more specific proposal. So I guess raise your hand if you would.
I think I think the subcommittee should look at everything that was on the ballot the last 2 times and decide if there's anything on those that we can put with this. Valerie, mentioned that she doesn't want to muddy the waters, and I totally get that. And I can pretty clearly explain to people in that subcommittee why those things are on there, but I think most of them we probably don't want to address in this go-around of a charter change, but we can discuss that also and put that to the subcommittee discussion.
So are you suggesting an entire charter review committee, or just?
No, I'm not. I'm suggesting just looking at, because we already went through twice every word in the charter with a fine-tooth comb. There's issues in there that I know about that I wouldn't necessarily want to address at this time. I've got literally multi-thousand word, at least 1,000 words of opinion on Mark Bartholomew on some of those issues, but I don't want to go there now. But I would like to look at potentially just the things that were on the ballot either last time, just even that was on the ballot last time, and decide, are there any of those that we want to put on? But I'm willing to discuss, any of that, but I'm saying, to me, look at the changes we made last time, that we proposed last time, and which one of those we want to go forward, and also a dollar amount.
Joel?
To me, the dollar amount in terms of an $80 million budget between 300 and even 1,000 is really not worth a lot of time. And it depends, the question is what's socially acceptable to the citizens, and $1,000 wasn't acceptable, so we just need to make a decision if we want to put something on the ballot. And if it's 300 or 500, I'm not sure that it makes much difference. It doesn't make much difference to the budget. Whether it makes much difference to the voters, I don't know. The other thing is it probably doesn't make much difference to the counselors either, because difference of $100 a month won't go very far either way.
Val?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back, and I understand with as much energy that Rob has put into this, which I know he has put a lot of energy into this in the past, and I do respect that and understand, why it happened. I will say that incident that happened with Darren, and I was very upset about it at the time, a lot of that was just a fluke in timing, because it just happened in December over the break. And the chances of that, I think, happening again, I would like to think a lot of that was fluky. Same thing kind of with the mayor's. I mean, there's always going to be a little bit of controversy on anything. And so I think the cleaner that you make it, the better. So I would just suggest that at this point in time, we just clean up any of the grammatical errors, because there were some of those small things, and just put on a payment to mayor councils and choose. I would not go any higher than 500. I'm the same thing. I feel either 300, 500 in that range is where I would go. But I would still like to keep it clean and just go with that.
So,
I'm confused because you say keep it clean, just
Limited have it be, just have it be the payment of the counselors, is I guess what I'm saying.
Okay, but then you also mentioned small grammatical things.
Well, I mean, there were some just like misspelled, and I don't know if we can just go ahead and do that without doing a change.
So really quickly, there were things that were clearly just grammar.
Yes.
There were things that could look like grammar that actually had bigger implications. I'm just saying that certainly at the next, maybe we should have another workshop.
Specifically look at those.
Specifically look at those, but there were some that were just grammar. The thing with the mayor and the special meeting looks like it's grammar, but it's way more than bigger implication. But whether or not we want to go there, it's kind of a minor issue, but it is. But I hear what you're saying. There were some things that were purely grammar that were, yeah, we could throw those on there for sure and not muddy the waters. I would agree.
Okay. In the interest of time today, I would like us to decide whether we're going to have a committee that either is specific to counselor stipends or is going to review some of those charter changes. So can we just go around the room and you can express whether you're interested in having a discussion on either one of those topics on a future date? Brian?
I don't know that I feel that a subcommittee is necessary.
Okay. Val?
Well, I just want clarification. So you're saying you want it on
Did-
another meeting, but just not a subcommittee? Is that what you're saying?
I think this is pretty straightforward. I don't know that we need to form a subcommittee. I think we can, one more workshop and we can finalize it.
Well, that's what I was talking about. So you're saying one more workshop without a subcommittee. I wasn't unsure. I was unclear of that. I think maybe if we all just took the time to read the charter or look at got the document of what the last one was, we probably could be aware of those and then come back and have another meeting if we were to get that memo.
So you would also like it to just be a workshop? Okay. Rick?
With the documentation, workshop would be fine.
Okay. Joel?
Workshop's fine.
Yeah, I agree, and I sent out to everybody the link to the last ballot in 19, and it's got cross-outs, so you can see exactly what the changes were.
Kurt.
If you had any questions as to how we arrived at any of that, you can ask me, but it's pretty straightforward.
Kurt?
I concur workshop.
Okay. And DJ?
So, yeah, my hand's been up for comment for a while, so I'm going to provide my comment and then respond about the committee.
Had to make
When we did this in 19, I had found the response from our constituents to be ambiguous since we lumped them all together. I'm well versed in the charter changes. I don't want a subcommittee in doing this. I think we made a mistake in lumping them all together because we don't know what our constituents said yes or no to. I'd strongly advise spending the money and separating all these issues and ask all the individual questions. Like Rob said, some more simple grammatical errors, others have great impact for the authority of the government in our community. I'd be in favor of the same amount that we asked for, virtually asking the same questions, and I think a subcommittee would be a waste of time at this point.
Okay. It sounds like we will have another workshop where we review the last charter amendment proposal and go from there. Next up, some ARPA funding.
All right, good afternoon, Mayor, Council. Coming back to you with some additional information and request for direction or further conversation with Council with regards to identifying and allocating resources associated with ARPA. Specifically, some of the items, the 4 items that Council wanted to talk some more about was the water treatment trailer, the urban growth boundary infrastructure to jumpstart development, land bank, and then affordable housing. Relationship to goals is all of our goals. This just highlights where we are currently right now with the allocation of the resources associated with ARPA, which is about the $9.3 million that we have. I'm going to move right into the first item for council discussion, and that is the water treatment trailer. This is an item that was suggested for council. It deals with, we currently have 1 water treatment trailer, which is basically looks like a camper trailer almost, that has a water treatment facility inside of it. It provides an opportunity for us to pull water from the river and treat it on a small scale. It's just a small version of our large water treatment plant right now, and to provide water in an emergency situation. We have been working with emergency management. Emergency management has been awarded a grant for a second emergency water supply trailer that would be basically put under the city's guidelines and direction, where we would maintain the water trailer itself. This would be a very similar water trailer to our membrane filtration plant that we will be building. So we technically have, I believe, 2 technologies associated with the trailers. And we were moving forward with getting that, and then all of a sudden we got these ARPA dollars, and so the ARPA dollars provided an opportunity for us to maybe get a trailer. So having a discussion with you on do we have 2 or 3 trailers is really where I need direction from you today on, and that council was wanting to have additional conversations. In the event of emergency with regards to the current emergency management trailer, we would have the authority to utilize and or allocate the resource to another location based on the emergency use request. So if the whole Southern Oregon is down from an emergency perspective, we would have the ability to utilize that trailer. If there was an emergency, say in Cave Junction, and they needed the trailer, we would have the ability to authorize the use of that trailer based upon their request through the emergency management system to provide that resource to them. City water treatment plant does have limited staffing to operate and maintain a 3rd trailer, and that was why we wanted to bring up the concern of having actually 3 water treatment trailers, although redundant necessity is a good thing. 3 might be a little too much for us to take on from a staffing perspective. Staff recommends reallocation of resources for another use, and to provide you with some additional guidance associated with that is we have a project that we believe would be ideal, and from an emergency management perspective and actually daily service perspective, this could be a real win if council would like to allocate some resources for this. We currently have a deficiency in our public safety communications. This deficiency can play a major role in the safety and security of our police officers, firefighters, and emergency service personnel. It does compromise and put staff at community risk when it comes to dispatch 911. We have dead spots throughout the city because we need some additional coverage. The solution would be to place a repeater on top of US Cellular Tower, which is on the top of Dollar Mountain, which would decrease potential dead spots in the city for public safety communications. Looking at the cost of what a repeater would be up there would be approximately $200,000, which would be the allocation that we've identified for a emergency response water treatment trailer. We did look into this and to see if it is an ARPA allowable use. We've determined that it is, as ARPA allowable use does provide for provision of police, fire, and other public safety services. Would you like me to stop there or continue on with the other 3 items?
Does anybody have any questions about this? Brian?
Yeah. Could you describe in more detail the deficiencies that currently exist?
In the 911 communication system? Yeah, most definitely. Chief, will you come up and please provide some additional details on that?
Hello, sir. That's a great question. And with our communications model through our grants passed in Josephine County, it's not perfect, nor is any communications system. This gives us a perfect opportunity to knock out those dead spots. Perfect example, if an officer, let's say myself, traveling southbound on I-5, just past the exit 55, my radio starts to get spotty almost immediately. So if I hear an emergency happening, I have to try to figure out what's going on. I might need to pull over or call into the dispatch center. That's just a good example of what a dead spot looks like. There are a variety of locations within the community. I don't have them off the tip of my tongue right now, but I do know that this is something that we've explored and never really had the opportunity to look into. And most recently, we found out that we are, I won't say likely, we have a really good chance of working with US Cellular to put what's called a repeater or a shelter up on Dollar Mountain. So we could utilize that power, and that communication range would increase threefold. Police and fire, and would alleviate a lot. So you can probably tell I'm pretty excited by this. This is a great opportunity, but it's a really better opportunity so we can be heard everywhere in town. Because as far as a police officer is concerned, one dead spot, if it's behind a Walmart, if they're in the middle of a burglary in progress, is a bad thing. So if we could even fix one dead spot, it's a success.
Thank you.
Any other questions about this one? Joel?
I just wondered, there's already some repeaters up there from other agencies. Are their needs fully met as well or not? Like ODF and BLM, the county?
No, there's not, and this is why this is a great opportunity. We wouldn't, these are our toys and we wouldn't share with anybody. Right off, initially, as I look into this project, this is going to initially be a police and fire project. We will have a radio for both police and fire and both frequencies. We might want to reconsider removing our repeater from the Parkway station because it's not getting a lot of play in general. So we might even be able to utilize some recycle potential with the equipment we currently have. But of course we would do that and we would reach out to our partners so we could get the best value for our dollars.
Sure, thank you.
Brian?
So, council's already had many discussions about the ARPA money and made decisions about the allocations. So is this like a brand new development, or I'm kind of wondering why this wasn't brought up when staff presented the recommendations when that time, when we were doing that, and why it's coming up kind of almost after the fact now.
I probably should have just stayed up there, but I'll take the mic to the rear and I'll stand up. That's a great question, because we just didn't think it was a possibility. We recently had some communications with US Cellular regarding a separate municipal ordinance on the usage, and I can't speak to that. That was Augustus's project. So always thinking forward and always trying to better the community, I thought there might be an opportunity. And with this sudden opportunity, I reached out to the city attorney and said, hey, can you please talk to these people and see if there's a possibility that we might be able to take advantage of this new partnership? Everything so far points in the direction of yes. So our team at the 911 center have already applied potentially for usage of this facility to co-locate equipment with them. This is an incredible opportunity, and as soon as I sniffed this opportunity out, I thought it would be foolish not to try and get it because it would have lasting impact for many years to come.
Very good. Thank you, Chief. And then just regarding the water trailer question, so we have one, and then the second one will be housed with us. It is not owned by us. It is owned by Emergency Management. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then with regards to the priority that that second trailer has, you mentioned an example where there's like a widespread emergency, like let's just say a Cascadia event happens, all over Southern Oregon. What is the city's priority in being able to use that second trailer?
So I've been assured by Emily at Emergency Management that if there is an emergency in Southern Oregon, that trailer is staying in Southern Oregon. If there's nothing going on here and Cascadia affects up north and up north requests use of the trailer, then at that point, the state emergency management could move that trailer up north to help. But if there is an emergency here, it'll stay here.
So you say Southern Oregon. So if that event is centered in Southern Oregon and say Medford has the most critical need, or let's say the needs are critical everywhere, but Medford has the most population, is there a scenario where Grants Pass could not have priority use and then it would go to another municipality?
From what Emily told me, the answer to that is no. If we are actively responding to an emergency to our constituents, that trailer is staying here with us. Even though there are more people over there and they're responding to an emergency of their own, if we are actively responding to an emergency, the trailer stays here.
Thank you.
Somebody else over here have a question? Rob? Not anymore?
Basically, that's my question answered. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions about the water trailer or the, what do we call it, repeater? Okay. Next topic.
I'll move on to the next one, which is the urban growth boundary infrastructure for front loading. So this was an identified program for council. Really what it does is it would identify stormwater water resources to go and front load for development, water, and sewer and water infrastructure. Wow. So yeah, whew. So we talked about how we would do this, and one of the things council wanted to do was they showed interest in doing an RFP. So we'd do an RFP and we'd see what kind of responses there were in the community when it came to development potential. What we have here is I've got a number of slides that provide some suggested language with regards to what that RFP would include. One of the things council discussed was evaluation criteria. So we have 12 points here that I wanted to go over with you that would be in the RFP. So if council still wants to go down this road, we would ultimately, once we have consensus from council, move forward with the development of finalizing this RFP, and then putting it out there and waiting for responses from the community. The evaluation that we'd be looking at is completeness of the project relative to RFP technical requirements. That'd be worth 5 points. The site has demonstrated a history and or clear evidence of not being developed due to a lack of stormwater or water services, 10 points. Area is in need of both water and sewer extensions and would be ranked higher than those that only need one utility, 10 points. The amount of land that would be open to new development, larger areas will receive higher priority, 10 points. Proposed number of dwelling units, 10 points. ARPA funds can be paired or leveraged with other readily available funding sources, which would provide 5 points. Continuing on to point number 7, project aligns with a recommended capital project and adopted master plan that increases city capacity, 5 points. Demonstrated experience of the developer in the successful execution of affordable workforce housing projects. Developers' proven ability to access funding resources to develop and complete projects with 20+ units or lots. Developers demonstrated readiness to proceed with a project no later than July 1st, 2023. And that's in alignment with the requirement for us to get these monies spent within the December 23 and then the December 24 and the December 26 deadline. Capacity and history of the developer to implement high quality housing projects, 10 points, and developer references would be 5 points. That would be the criteria that we'd be evaluating the responses to. Some additional information that would be in the RFP would be the general scope, and this defines what that is, and really what we're looking at is the city would be seeking qualified residential developers that can develop larger tracts of land. Once the utilities were put into place, they would need to provide some kind of demonstration of proven successes of something along these lines in the past. Priority would be given to neighborhoods where the development potential is constrained due to barriers of public water and sewer. An agreement between the city and developer for committing to a specific development site and scope would need to be executed by December 1st, 2023 to meet those timelines. And key objectives for the project could include something like community compatibility, affordable, targeted to households earning 120 area median income. And just to give you an idea, if we were to do something along these lines from a scope perspective, time-wise, we'd be looking at potentially getting additional or ending feedback from council by July 6th. We could finalize the RFP and post it with the deadline for submission being August 5th. August 19th would be the deadline for the submission of proposals. And then we would evaluate the proposals, and September 12th, they would be presented to council, and then we'd follow up with negotiations based on council's recommendation. And I'm going to stop there before I move on to the land bank if you want to ask any questions with regards to the UGB infrastructure.
Thank you. Are there questions? Brian.
Yeah, thank you for putting together this scoring criteria. I appreciate that, there's objective standards that everything will be measured by. Some of the criteria seem like they should just be requirements and not necessarily weighted, like completeness of the proposal. Like that just should be a requirement. I don't know if that should necessarily be weighted by points. The one that is, there's a lot that are really important, but the one that is particularly important to me with regards to the goals of the city with regards to housing is number 5, proposed number of dwelling units. And I don't know that I feel like that particular point is specific enough. I would probably appreciate it saying something more like proposed number of dwelling units in relation to the amount of funding being requested, so we could have a measuring stick of amount of money spent per unit that we're going to be getting out of it. Because just having it be dwelling units alone without that cross measure of how much the city would be spending per unit is not as valuable. Being able to get as many units as we can for the money we're putting out is an important criteria to me, and I would hope it is to council, just so we can be most effective with our funding.
So that's a great discussion point. Is it really the number of units that you're looking for, or is it potentially the leveraging of public dollars for private investment on a per housing cost? What are we at? Are we only subsidizing this proposal by 15% versus this other one by 50%? That's a great question for council.
Yeah, for example, when we were talking about the home bridging just now, there's 22 units proposed, and the amount for the infrastructure was, I think, 360 something thousand, which works out to about 16,000 and change per unit being developed. So that's kind of the metric that I'm looking at, is how much per unit is the city paying. So that scoring criteria, I think, would be important to us. It's certainly important to me, but I'm interested in hearing if other councilors agree.
Joel?
So as I listen to that, that's a very good criteria. When we subsidize the building, there's going to be the people that come in with the lowest cost per unit probably could afford to do it without the subsidization. So like if you had one here that was going to be really cheap, and it's a good deal for our money to subsidize it, well, it probably doesn't need subsidization. But there might be another one like that it's so expensive, nobody's going to do it unless it's subsidized. And so in the private sector, I would agree with you that would be a very good criteria. In the public sector, where the number of units that we want built might be a little different criteria, so that we don't pay money to folks that can already afford to do it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's why we have 12 different criteria that we would be scoring. This would only be one of the 10 or 12 criteria of the whole process, but I think just having more clarification on that specific one would be helpful, and it wouldn't necessarily exclude a particular project, but it would give us more specificity on how it scores on that particular piece.
And maybe you include both. So that one doesn't override the other.
All right. Are there any other questions for Aaron? Val?
Well, I guess going back to that point, it seems to me that the more dwelling units they're going to have, they're going to get the 10 points. And if they have fewer dwelling units, they're going to have fewer points. So isn't that kind of doing that? I mean, I'm just thinking to myself that if I'm scoring through all these, if they're more dense, they're obviously going to get maximum points on that particular case.
You would think that there's a correlation between the two.
Mm-hmm.
That would be, I think, true if you were looking at the same street in development. But we may get different areas in a response from the proposals, where maybe the front loading of the water and wastewater is a very small track versus a very long run, which would affect that per capita comparison to the overall investment. So it won't always be a true apples and apples comparison.
But the number above that kind of takes in that situation where it says the amount of land that will be opened up is larger. So that's why I feel like with all of these criteria, I think you're kind of broadly hitting on all of that, because each one has its own little category, and that's what the purpose of it is kind of, you know, how many dwelling units on it, how much land would be opened up for future, even if you didn't use it all, somebody else could come in and add more to it later. I think you did a really good job, myself, of trying to hit all the points for the evaluation criteria. And as Brian did, I do appreciate that specificity, I think that's the word. So I do approve of what you have here.
Did you have a question, Rick? No. Other questions? Brian?
Yeah, I just have one more question on the criteria. Would it be appropriate to consider one of the criteria to potentially revolve around level of density met with the project?
That ultimately is, you know, council's determination. And these are just suggestions to try to take into account all that. If you put them all together, it sort of does apply that you will get more points with the denser. I mean, a denser project will get more points than a less dense project.
I don't know that I necessarily see that in the criteria as written. I think if it's explicitly laid out and scored, that it will be, that projects will strive to meet that more. So I would advocate for maybe considering adding some sort of scored criteria revolving around the density that will be met by the project.
All right, any other questions about the UGB infrastructure? Okay.
All right,
Great.
now we're going into some other ones that have a little less directed feedback required and a little more openness in when it comes to council consideration and comments. So we're talking next about the land bank. And that was an item where council had a desire and they put in a little over $1 million for a land bank. We talked about how you would do a land bank, and there were three main ways that we talked about. There's partnering or contribute funds to an existing nonprofit land banking type of entity. There's the land bank just informally through the city process, or there's creating a unique city-run affordable housing land bank. And at the time, council made a recommendation that we move forward with number 2, which would be that we just sort of informally do a land bank, which is sort of what we are doing now with just identifying some properties that would be for future housing. Since our conversation, and because some of the word is getting out, I have had conversations with both our housing council here locally, Josephine County Housing Council, and the Jackson County Housing Authority, and there is potential interest with, and I'm waiting for word back on the housing council here locally, but Jackson County Housing Authority has shown interest in continuing the conversation of the potential of partnering with the city in this kind of aspect also. So maybe utilizing the nonprofits in a partnership with both Jackson and Josephine Housing to maybe appropriate some of these funds for land bank could be an option also, but that is not yet fully developed. It is a conversation that's been had. So, council direction, acquisition of property in preparation for future affordable housing development, identify acquisition process. And that's sort of where we are right now with the land bank aspect in this conversation today, is how are we going to move forward with making progress in a timely fashion to where we can get a little over $1 million spent in time, and how do we want to take that approach? Are we going to internally look for and perform certain outreach to identify and evaluate properties? Are we going to foster or continue to foster relationships with some of the nonprofit housing authorities to see if they'd be interested in taking on that responsibility? That is sort of some of the questions and just general direction that I'm needing from council, and how you would like to have us move forward when it comes to a land bank. And with that, Mayor, I'll stop at that point before we move on to the next item.
Any questions about this? Joel?
So Aaron, you just need to educate me. Who are our affordable housing nonprofits that have that capability?
Well, sometimes I think options especially in Roseburg, is a little more active in that. They could potentially be a partner down here for us because they do serve both Josephine and Douglas County. We have our Josephine County Housing Council, which could definitely be a partner in some form or fashion, and then also Jackson County Housing Authority, who has done similar or something like projects, that has done some projects here also. Ideally, it'd be great if we could get some of those nonprofits partnering together and we do some kind of IGA associated with these funds to get those spent in the most efficient way possible, if they could also identify or utilize that to help bolster their affordable housing projects.
Thank you.
Brian?
Thank you. I see a lot of overlap in between land bank and the next topic, which is just general affordable housing projects. So with regards to soliciting development proposals from housing providers, would it be potentially appropriate to look at other organizations that might want to partner on housing, for example, Asante or Road Community College or All Care? Would those entities also be appropriate for these kinds of projects?
Potentially, I think you've got, when you're speaking of some of those other ones, they may have different interests than what's allowed under the ARPA guidelines. We would have an easier time and probably a more potential success if we stuck with the partners that already deal with community development block grant dollars, like the Housing Authority or the Housing Council, because they're used to those requirements and they have systems already in place, versus Asante or All Care Community Foundation.
I see. So maybe a scenario where we're working with those entities that have experience and then potentially bringing on a third-party partner just to leverage further is something that could be done.
Yes, and I'll continue, especially if council doesn't have any objections, fostering the further discussion with both the Josephine County Housing Council and Jackson County Housing Authority to see if we can maybe bring something to you, which I think would be an exciting opportunity.
Thank you.
Any other questions right now? All right, move on to housing projects.
All right, so housing projects, it gets even broader. Now we're talking about housing projects when it comes to affordable housing, and ARPA, you have allocated $2 million for this. And as we've discussed, you've seen this slide before, really the top areas in getting affordable housing and incentivizing that is through land acquisition and disposition and allocation of funding in some form or fashion in order to make that happen. Breaking it down some more with regards to ARPA and how you can utilize those funds. There has been a discussion by council that you really wanted to sort of focus on some of these first few bullet points under affordable housing development and rehab. So today's discussion is, I think, relatively general or broad in nature, but if council has specifics along with some of these or something's identified under these broad categories that you'd like us to get more to an objective or action, we'd be more than happy to do that. And as Councilor De La Grange said, a land bank sort of falls within these lines too. So in essence, you can sort of think about your affordable housing allocation of resources at $3 million. There could be, with further discussion with the Housing Council and Authority, maybe they could make an argument that they could utilize a lot of that for something along those lines that would all apply to ARPA. But I'll continue to have those discussions in a timely fashion, because we are getting to a point where, especially when you're talking about purchasing land or dedicating land or those kind of things, there's going to be a time constraint in order for us to get there. And I know these are big ticket items, and it just takes one or two pieces of property and we could probably have all the money spent. But I'm just thinking of the process. We need to make sure we keep on task in order to get these dollars spent. So in conclusion, we have the $9.3 million of ARPA. Funds must be obligated by December 24, spent by December 26. There is a number of items that we didn't talk about today that I think we have general direction from council that staff can continue to go on, which is the swimming pool, Parkland grant program, Baker Park restroom, portable toilets, survey cost, water capital projects, and the ARPA survey. The things that we talked about today were things that we still need some additional direction from council, and that is the water trailer. What would you like to do with that? Urban growth boundary infrastructure, and are you in general comfortable with the RFP? And we'll put that together based on the guidelines that we went over today. And then the land bank and affordable housing projects, which are very similar in nature. With that, Mayor, I turn it over to you.
Thanks, Aaron. All right, let's hop back to the water treatment trailer. Oh, we've got Rob, Joel, Kurt.
Yeah.
Val.
Oh, well. So what's the capacity of the water treatment trailer? Like, in other words, if 35,000 people had no water from the water treatment plant, what's the capacity of one of those trailers?
So the trailers are sized to provide emergency water only, and you have to come to us to get it. It's 1 gallon per person per day, which is right in line with the FEMA guidelines. We can produce about 40 gallons per minute per unit. I believe the one from emergency management is slightly larger. So it's not a tremendous amount of water. It is really potable drinking water only.
So 1 gallon
Per person.
The plan would be 1 gallon per day per person.
Yep.
And 40 gallons per minute could be.
Yeah, that gets you up to, thank you. Somebody's quicker on the calculator than I.
Okay, thank you.
But how many?
Per unit, per trailer, so that's times 2.
But how many staff do you have available who would be able to use that?
So there's only 5 staff members at the water treatment plant currently, and the trailers take, 1 person essentially to operate, but, that's only for 8 hours, then they would have to shift out. So it would be tough for us to keep 2 of them running full time.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Joel?
So one more question along those lines. So the trailers would have to be located right next to the water source, right next to the river, or so there'd kind of probably be one on one bank of the river and north side, or one on the south side, or something like that.
Yeah, the plan is to keep one on each side of the river, but it's not just limited to the river. If we have a pond, we can pull water out of a pond and treat that water. Ideally, we'll be close to the river. Baker Park is almost always going to be accessible. That's one location we prefer. Same thing, probably farther down, the next boat ramp, farther down on the other side of the river would be the next appropriate location.
Thanks.
Joel?
Well, for me, if one of those has a capability of providing drinking water for 26,000 people per day if it's run 24 hours a day, and so 2 of them would provide enough drinking water for 52,000. So we got some redundancy there. The one thing that I like about the proposal that the chief gave us was communication during command and control is essential. And when you look at the tragedy that has occurred in our schools across the nation, especially down in Arizona, where there wasn't, and it was communication for a different reason, but it didn't occur with the incident commander. It can be a bad situation. So to me, it would be a no-brainer to, we already got redundancy on the water trailer, to go ahead and accept the recommendation by staff that we not get a 3rd one and increase it beyond our capacity for population, and use it to cover our blind spots in the case of an emergency, whether it's fire, water, or whatever it is.
Kurt?
That was Texas, by the way. That was Texas, okay. Yeah. So, I'm all for water, but I think the expense of buying the trailer to fix a safety problem we might have versus using it for the repeater to fix a safety problem we do have is kind of a no-brainer. I'd go with the repeater.
Val?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with that as well. I know that I just happened to be at a swimming pool place that I get my water from, and I was so impressed that they have their own water cleaning capacity as well. So it just made me realize that there are private people out there that also have that capability of taking water and converting it. So to me, that was, in the real world emergency situation, private people come to do just as much as public people do. So it gives me that much more realization that they could also step up to the plate and help out in some way. And I will just agree that blind spots in communication 911 are probably more a better use at this point in time for the money. So I'm going to go ahead along with the chief and agree to have that money go towards the repeater.
Rick?
I'm also in favor of approving communication. I have a neighbor that goes back to, I think, the early 1900s, and they have a private well, and they've never gone on city water, so if I really got in a situation, I'd go visit them and fill my jug. I think 2 water trailers is sufficient, and I think we should be moving forward on improving communication. Thank you.
Brian?
I agree with what everyone has said. I think, since we've been reassured that we truly do have, control of that second trailer in case of an emergency in our community, I think that fulfills the need. And I think that reallocating that money is appropriate to, as Kurt put, an existing problem that we're currently facing. So I would be in favor of that. And if, as the chief said, they might be able to relocate an existing repeater that doesn't get a whole lot of use right now, which could bring down the cost of that project. If there's any money left over from that 200,000, since, we're throwing new things out there, I would advocate that money left over goes to purchasing additional pallet shelters for the campground so we have less people in tents. Thank you.
All right, well, we have 5 people who've spoken up in support of the repeater. No one said anything against. I think we can assume that we're okay to move on with that plan. Next up, let's talk about, how about the urban growth boundary infrastructure evaluation criteria? Joel?
I think we need to move ahead, and might be a few minor adjustments in the criteria, but I think we need to identify, we need the RFP just to make sure we get things done in a timely manner. As we move ahead too, hopefully economic conditions will be such that it'll be appropriate and make it even easier to do, so we'll see.
Brian?
Yeah, we obviously need to move forward and get this going. With regards to the details, with this and with the land bank and with the affordable housing projects, a key criteria is how many units are we getting for how much money we're putting into the project. It's like miles per gallon for your car. What are we getting for the money we're investing into the project? So I'm just trying to ensure that on this particular piece, that's happening. And so that's why I proposed looking at the number of dwelling units in relation to the amount of money being requested for the project. And then also asking for the, a scoring criteria for density, because we don't have infinite land, and it's in the city's best interest for the land to be built out to a higher density rather than a lower density.
Hang on a second, Rick. I haven't added up. I don't know if these points are trying to reach a certain goal or if they add up to an even number. Do they add up to 100? Okay, so if we were to make any changes, you would want it to be still balance out to 100? Okay, so Brian, is your suggestion to change number 5 or to add an additional dwelling unit, dollar per dwelling unit factor?
No, I would propose to modify number 5 just to say proposed number of dwelling units in relation to amount requested, which I mean, it's very straightforward. It gives you the calculation of how much money per dwelling the city is getting. And then criteria 1 is really should just be a requirement. So those 5 points could potentially be reallocated to number 5 to make that worth 15 points.
Rick?
On item 1, I can see somewhat of an importance in there because a lot of times you get applications that are not complete, so that could be an advantage. But the question or the perspective I see on item 5, proposed number of dwelling units. So if you have 2 projects set before you and somebody has more dwelling units than the other one, then to me it would be an automatic winner. And do you see that where you have 2 applications? So under criteria 5, the one that has more dwelling units is going to have an advantage?
So what I'm trying to get at here is number of dwelling units by itself is not a useful criteria because, you know, let's say there's a project that has 20 units and they request, you know, $5 million. And then you have a project that is, you know, 10 units and $2 million. The number of dwelling units is irrelevant if it doesn't have the yardstick of how much money we're paying to incentivize it. Is that, and then with...
I know what you're saying, we'll get more for the money.
It's bang for the buck. Like I'm trying to get bang for the buck for the ARPA money here. So I'm trying to get the most number of units for the amount of money that we have. And so if it's just flat number of dwelling units without the amount of money being requested, it's not as useful of a criteria.
Aaron?
One of the potential concerns with that is that if you just did it by that ultimate number of units per cost of infrastructure, that may put an undue burden on that one and lessen the 10-point category of open available land. So you may have a developer saying, I want to request this 1 mile road to be water and sewer. I'm putting in 20 houses. The future projection of that is, you know, 5-fold or whatever it may be. So the actual impact of the infrastructure that we're front loading is huge because it opens up a huge area. But if you're looking at just cost per unit, I don't know, that's going to be, it would make that extremely high to where you would rank that extremely low if they're only putting in 20 units versus someone else that's putting in 20 units with a small run.
Right, so in that scenario, we probably wouldn't want to fund that project because it doesn't pencil out as far as the goals of the ARPA money.
That would still meet the ARPA qualifications.
Certainly, but we're deciding the criteria, so while it would meet the qualifications, we wouldn't be getting as much out of the money as we could if we looked at this criteria.
Joel?
So item number 6 there, where it can be paired or leveraged with other readily available funding sources means the cost per dwelling goes down. So what I would do is I would have 6 be the cost per dwelling, including any paired or leveraging with other available funding sources. So that we have a separate one, and then we also have the proposed number of units, and they're, because they're both important. And they, you know, and you're not going to replace the human mind on deciding which ones we're going to do. It's just a tool. And so I look at number 6. It addresses the cost per dwelling. It just doesn't specifically say so. And if we include that there, and then include with that, if it's paired or leveraged with other readily available funding sources, that the cost per dwelling reflect that.
That would be acceptable. I think that would meet the same goal. I don't know that criteria 1 needs to be scored. I think criteria 1 is a requirement, like the applications need to be complete. So, you know, that's not something where someone gets more points if it's complete and someone gets less. The applications should be just be complete. So that those 5 points could potentially be reallocated to number 6 because number 6 is only worth 5 points right now.
Is that, I'm not that familiar with scoring an RFP, but as far as number 1 goes, is there an important reason to have number 1 be part of the rubric, the completeness of the proposal?
In Public Works, we don't put completeness as an evaluation criteria. It's a pass-fail. I'm trying to say that, but this is a little bit more subjective. You're actually doing a proposal, and so the more complete the proposal is, the better the evaluators can do that. In Public Works, it's really more about that low bid and did they fill in all the boxes, and so we don't do that. But for something like this, I could see where if somebody had a more complete proposal, like they knew where the water lines were going to be and they knew how deep and all of that other stuff, you would want to score that one higher.
I think if council wants to, you have the ability to do what you want on the evaluation criteria. This is just suggested, but you could eliminate the 1, take the 5 points, add it to number 6, change the wording in number 6 to be a comparison of number of units for cost of infrastructure.
Okay. Well, what is council's, are you in support of doing that? Eliminating 1, revising number 6? Val?
Well, I'm going to come in defense of number 1, being married to a builder, and I'm just going to say it because I know through the years, you know, when he's put together projects or when he's done such things, there are a lot of technical requirements. And so you're going to have people that are going to miss some of them. I mean, that's just kind of, there's a lot of technical stuff. So I think that is valid, personally. And I think maybe DJ can step in and see, maybe I'm wrong, but I would just say that there's levels of completeness in those sorts of projects. So that's something to think about. I personally think we're making too big a deal about, I think, could you put proposed number of dwelling units per acre? I mean, because that, in a sense, the higher density it is, the more points it's going to get. I'm just trying to keep it as simple as possible. I mean, this whole dollar for dollar, I mean, I can tell you right now, with the cost of building supplies going up, they're not going to know what in the heck they're not going to be right on the number for whatever. I mean, that's almost an impossible thing to do. So I think just looking, if you want more density, to put proposed number of dwelling units per acre as being a category. And once again, I'll go back to what Aaron said. You know, sometimes the piece of land may be bigger, the density may not be quite as high, but that, of course, will depend upon zoning on where it is. So how it is zoned might make a difference, because if it's zoned in such a place that they have to have a higher density, then automatically they have to have that density. So that'll be there. So you could just look at what is their density per unit on that particular piece of property. It's all going to depend upon where and all those things. So I think it's pretty simple. I think as it's spelled out, I think we can try to tweak it, but I think the reality of it is we don't really know what we're talking about because we don't do building. So I trust that the city came up with it. And I would like to get DJ's info on the technical requirements.
Okay, so at this time you're supporting just leaving as is. Okay. DJ, did you want to weigh in?
Doesn't look like he's online anymore.
Okay. Somebody else? Brian?
Yeah, no, I agree that we are not experts in this. However, we do have the Housing Advisory Committee that, you know, are experts in this exact area. So I might be in favor of getting their opinion on the scoring criteria to see if it meets our goals, since we're not the experts on this.
Which comes down to, I guess I have a question of who would be who would be pursuing this in the end anyway? Are we looking at staff evaluating the proposals, or?
Oh, yeah, normally with you could have it however you'd like. You can have the Housing Advisory Committee make the recommendation to you based on the responses. That would work. Staff could compile it and make a recommendation to you, or you can have it just straight go to council and you can do the recommendation.
So as far as the scoring and evaluating, we don't have that determined?
I'd like to have council direction on that. I'm sure the HAC would love to be involved in that process.
Okay. So I guess we have two questions right now. Council, would you like to be the evaluators? Would you like to pass it on to the committee to be the evaluators? And also questions about the evaluation criteria here, whether we want to leave it as is or refine it. And Joel, you have your hand on your mic.
Well, I just didn't want to spend a whole lot of time on the evaluation criteria because you're not going to let the criteria make the decision for you. You still got to think. And all of them will work. The suggestions, I like the unit cost ones. If I didn't have it, I can do it anyway in my mind as I think. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of your time talking about it, and I really don't need to refer it to other folks because I think it's pretty thorough, and if we want to tweak it a little bit, we can. But don't let the evaluation criteria think for you. You gotta look at it and then evaluate it, and there will be some subjective things that come to mind as we do it.
Brian.
Yeah, we're spending a lot of time on this, and I agree. I think, we can all do the unit cost as far as how many units we're going to get for the money spent. However, the way it's currently written, it's not a scoring criteria, so it's not a factor in the decision, and it absolutely should be a factor in the decision, so we're getting the most bang for our buck that we can. So I would advocate to have 6 modified so that it more closely reflects, the per unit cost as far as the money being allocated.
All right, so we've heard from Brian, Joel, and Valerie on the per unit cost, but we need to hear from some other people if we're going to be able to move on. Do you want to leave it as is, Rick? Do you want to include the unit cost in number 6?
I think if there's an easy way of adding that in there, it might be appropriate because, but the thing is already number 6 uses the word leverage, so isn't that automatic? The word leverage produces the results, no?
I don't know, it's a little bit different, I guess, as it's written.
Okay.
Rob, Kurt?
Yeah, I could see doing away with number 1 and adding those points to number 6 as far as the essentially reflecting density in number 6. I understand number 1, it makes it easier for staff if somebody's really made a really detailed application, but I also kind of look at that as just a participation trophy, really. So I would be in favor, I guess, changing number 6.
Okay.
I would argue against taking away 1. In my experience putting together proposals, if somebody puts a slipshod proposal together and beats somebody who put a lot of time and effort into it, how are they going to be on the project? So I think the completeness evaluation should remain. And as far as the dwelling units, what if it's a family dwelling unit versus a 1-bedroom apartment? I think that has to be considered too. And like Joel says, you can think it through. You don't have to depend on the evaluation.
Oh, it's a start. It's a start.
I think you have to put some thought into it. Didn't make it easy, did we?
No, you sure didn't. All right. I mean,
Well,
five points isn't going to make or break anybody's proposal, I should think either way, but I don't know.
We're making you earn your money.
Well, I think number one just is the tiebreaker, all other things being equal.
I don't know, this reminds me, I was part of an evaluation process recently for job interviews, and you sit there and you think you come up with the right questions, and then you're asking the 10 questions on the list and realize that they weren't the things you wish you were asking the person at all. So, and then everybody's points come down a little bit differently too. So, okay, let's add in either on 5 or 6, something that includes a cost per unit criteria, and we will leave 1 in there as well.
So this has taken, a lot of deliberation on council, so I see the importance of it. I guess recognizing the importance of it, it might be good to just modify 6 and not 5. That way you have 15 points that are associated with number of units and then a cost also. So that would be my suggestion if you want to have more points associated with number and density.
I think that works. And number 4 gets at the amount of land that will be opened up, so that kind of gets at the density. I think Brian's looking more at the cost value rather than the density of the project. Am I right? Okay, so 6 should somehow reflect value of units per dollar investment.
Investment per unit. Investment per unit.
All right. That was fun. ARPA Land Bank. Yeah, I'll pay you back later. I'm looking to see where we're at now. Okay, so we have previously indicated, I think if we move to slide 13, land bank informally using land that's already publicly owned or by acquiring new land has kind of been our go-to at this point. So we are being asked how we want staff to go about pursuing additional land acquisition opportunities. Is that the question here, Aaron?
Yeah, I wanted to get some general consensus if it's all right to continue foster relations with the housing authorities to see if they'd like to pick up that role in some form or fashion to help us spend that money for affordable housing. And then ultimately, if we're going to have our own campaign of developing a land bank, it would be advantageous for us to have a discussion on the top criteria for identifying the properties that you want to have in a land bank.
Joel?
Again, Aaron, you have to educate me a little bit. The existing capability of our nonprofits, are they capable of performing that to our standards?
That's what I'm exploring right now. I think in partnership with multiple agencies, we may be able to get there.
Okay, because that would be preferable, and then the backup is being 2, or maybe we do both 1 and 2.
Val?
Yeah, I would agree that it would be to our advantage, obviously, to have somebody else out there looking too. And if agencies are out there looking for affordable housing, then they're the ones that are out there, and it would require less staff time on our part. So anything that would lessen the time of our staff and make it more feasible, I would go along with that.
Brian?
Yeah, I would agree that having a third party take on some of the workload on this would be preferred, so staff isn't mired down in it. I know they're very busy. Again, looking at the criteria by which we're going to be allocating funds to a land bank, the criteria for me would be You know, how much is the land and how many potential units, you know, what is the maximum density of that land? How many units can you put on the land for the amount of cost? So that's something that we can explore internally or with the third party as those conversations move forward.
Well, it sounds like there is some interest in pursuing discussions with those partners. Affordable housing projects. This is a big one. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes hand in hand with land bank. I think a good way to proceed would probably be to also reach out to those third-party partners that are experts in housing in the community to see what ability they have to help us manage and identify projects that we can move forward on.
I think ultimately the $1 million for land bank identified specifically would do good, but we may have that true multiplying factor, like Councilor De La Grange was talking about. If we had the ability to offer up to $3 million for a agency partnership, we may be able to accomplish much more, and I can have that discussion also with them.
Val?
Yeah, something that I'm thinking about, and I actually have heard that, I mean, one of the projects is Project Turnkey, is an example of a project that may be opening up. I mean, we have not received the funding. They're prioritizing areas that do not have the funding. I do know in this next few weeks they are opening up the that and having that pool available, because even if, you know, buying a property will be part of it, and hopefully the project would come on, but there also will be rehabilitation costs involved with bringing it up to a certain level. So having that fluidity, I guess is a word, with that money might be a plus as well.
I think it's worth pursuing anyway. Council did kind of allocate this into two different closely related groups when we were going through that ARPA exercise, but I think people are probably generally open to ideas for how to use those dollars. So whether it's staff generated or from an outside agency. Brian?
Yeah, I would just add one point that, you know, although I don't want to overburden staff, I know staff is very capable of generating an RFP for a housing project like the Ramsey project that we have been working on. That is a good example project, and the city has already, you know, done the work. You know, they've already kind of invented the wheel, so to speak, on that. So, so that process could be utilized again if the city decides that we do want to procure land ourselves and then do an RFP similar to the Ramsey project. That would be another avenue that we could potentially take.
Joel?
And there's a part of me that really likes the diversity of Table 1 there under affordable housing projects. So the county organizations have just received the Measure 110 funding, including options. And I know in our medical practice, when we had people that were mentally challenged or mentally ill, those type of displacement prevention services and homelessness really were paid their way. And we could leverage dollars with that $10 million that came down as Measure 110 to the 5 different organizations in Josephine County. So I don't know how we do that, but I just want to tell you the diversification of those dollars, I think we'll have a big payoff.
It's a good point. Yeah, I think we're going to have to do another workshop that's, you know, after you gather some more information on what other partner agencies may be willing to offer where we look at these, because another big consideration is going to be how quickly we can get funds spent, and we may need to look at a number of smaller projects rather than something big that takes years. Brian?
Yeah, I think in looking into working with partners, also maybe not directly reaching out to them right now, but keeping in mind that there might be third-party partners that we can further leverage with, whether that's the county, whether that's RCC or AllCare or Asante. There's some of these organizations own large pieces of land that can be used for housing, so that could be a leverage point. Some of them need housing, so there's, in addition to the experts that could help facilitate it, there's also other resources in the community in the form of partners that we can utilize too.
Okay, so I guess you have direction to investigate a little bit further, and we'll have to plan another workshop, I think, to dig a little deeper once we get some ideas going on those. We're at the end of a 3-hour meeting here, so it is exciting, Joel. All right. More exciting than agenda scheduling. Are we ready to move on to the next topic here? All right, agenda review. So we have a meeting Wednesday with a really big packet because we are going to have a public hearing to look at an ordinance that would amend the Middle Housing Code, part of the Development Code. We have a public hearing to consider designating the Ford Historic Building, the Wonderbur, and the Clark McConnell House as historic landmarks. A public hearing to with an ordinance regarding a street plug vacation for the Southview Subdivision. Public hearing regarding state shared revenues and city budget. A public hearing on the Urban Renewal Agency budget. Then we have council action items that are an ordinance to make Woodbrook Drive Improvement Reimbursement District. A resolution that would reallocate URA project funds, a resolution for state revenue sharing, a resolution for levying taxes, a resolution for adopting the budget, a resolution for the replacement water treatment plant Phase 1B design services, a resolution to adopt the URA budget, a resolution approving commercial use in Riverside Park. And then our consent calendar has a resolution to make an interfund loan to the Bancroft Fund, a resolution for the Josephine County Assessor delinquent sewer charges, a resolution regarding tax receipts, a resolution regarding Urban Renewal Agency tax receipts, a resolution accepting funding from high intensity drug trafficking areas program, a resolution adding active local builder developer to the Housing Advisory Committee, a resolution awarding the C Street Waterline Replacement Project, a resolution authorizing a grant application for the Lincoln Road Improvement Project, a resolution for a school violence prevention program grant, a resolution for a Safe Routes to Schools grant application, resolution for an accreditation support grant, and a motion acknowledging the monthly financial report, and then appointing some members to the Historic Building Sites Commission has 1 vacancy, Parks Advisory Committee has 2 vacancies, and Bikeways Walkways has 2 vacancies. Questions about Wednesday?
Mayor, we have one correction on one of the items.
Correction. Okay, what was that?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a housekeeping for the 4th item up with it, which is the resolution for school violence prevention program grant. Actually, it's kind of pertinent in the wake of the tragedy. That amount actually is going up from the $81,000 that is in your packet to $110,000. It is a 3-year grant. There are 9 additional radios that are $23,000 plus that would be eligible for replacement, and as well as another $5,000 police officer training.
Okay, so the place on the agenda stays the same, but you have some...
We'll have additional documents put on the dais that'll correct those amounts.
Okay, so that will be here for us Wednesday evening?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Val?
Okay, I have a couple questions. On the, this was crazy. I'm just going to tell you, this was crazy. On the, let's see here, this is the one where we were getting information about the state revenue sharing, correct? Does that include like marijuana tax and all those sorts of things? I think the total is 495,000 if I'm not mistaken. I think it's 460,000 is revenue sharing, am I correct? Is there any way to get that broken down so that we can see it? Because it's my understanding, I mean, I just like to see it. I think I ask for this every year so that I know how much comes through, you know, marijuana tax, those sorts of things. Because that's the sharing that we're talking about, is those particular costs, am I correct?
I think the state revenue sharing is specifically defined in ORS. I'm not sure if it includes marijuana, but it's more gas, tax, and tobacco
Yeah, and
tax.
I guess my complaint is it never says what it is. I mean, here you have this 700 or 1,025 page packet, and on the revenue sharing page, there's one sentence that says $460,000, but you really don't know what it is. And I guess I would just like to have it specifically.
I can try and pull that information, but it is a calculation. It's
Okay.
not necessarily line item out like that, and so we kind of estimate based on our proportionate share of what that may be.
Okay,
It's
I
kind
guess
of
if it just
commingled
was-
with other jurisdictions.
Okay, well, it's just if I know it's coming from transportation or whatever, because I always just kind of wonder what it is, and
So would you like us to just give you an email on that breakdown?
Yeah, that would be great, yeah.
Okay.
And that was one thing. And my other question is reading 600 pages of this development on the middle housing code. I'm not sure, after reading that 600 pages, I know the difference between what our Urban Area Planning Commission recommended and what the state's middle code recommendation is. I had a hard time tweaking out the difference between the two. And unless it's in there, I don't know if anybody else was able to pull that information out specifically after reading through it. I could not tell you how our urban area, I mean, I read through pages and I know their discussion. They had three meetings,
Yeah.
and we had.
And it was somewhat controversial with some of those meetings.
Yes, and we had over 600 pages, and I got on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 5 days to read it. So to have me not, after trying to go through here, understand what the difference is between what our Urban Area Planning Commission did and what the state did is pretty crazy.
This one's a huge amount of information. Like I said, it's a ream of paper just for that one item. So we will, I'll have a discussion with Brad, and we'll make sure we highlight the differences in the states that we would have to adopt if we don't adopt our own, and what's different from Urban Area Planning Commission's recommendations to you on this packet.
Yes, I would appreciate that, because like I said, I did not, after spending many evenings trying to work through that, figure it out. And I will tell you that I feel like we're being held hostage, because it's kind of like, you know, we don't have a choice. I mean, it's almost ridiculously redundant for us to even have it in front of us and being told that we have to do this, because we don't have a choice. They're just telling us you can do something else, but you have to do this. And so, you know, I will state that Wednesday night. But anyway, I would really like to see the differences between the two. And after digging through, I couldn't figure it out.
All right, any other questions? Okay, the next week's workshop will cover the permanent funding for public safety issue, along getting some updated information about a county proposal. And then we have two different items that have to do with cell tower standards and design.
And Mayor, potentially we'll be adding, based on scheduling opportunity, the home bridging discussion again.
Yeah, okay. All right, anything looking forward for the next couple weeks that you would like to see added on there that's not on there? Brian?
So I brought this up last week. Council is currently operating outside of resolution with regards to councilor attendance remotely in the meetings. So if council wants to discuss that, that'd be great. Otherwise, I will just continue pointing it out that we're operating outside of resolution at our meetings. Thank you.
All right, council, does anybody want to have a meeting about council attendance? Rob?
Well, I think that we should either decide to enforce the current one or change it. You know, if we're okay moving forward with telephone participation, indefinite telephone participation, that's fine. I just think that we should make that clear so that you know, we're not playing favorites in the future and enforcing things for some and not for others. If we want to change it, we should change it, or we should enforce this one. That's my opinion.
All right, thank you. All right, I think that's all we have for today. Brian?
Motion to adjourn.
Second from Val, all in favor of adjourning today?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll see you on Wednesday. Got some reading to do.